Mayor Law, I've just started the recording.
Just on time. It is 4:30 and I'm calling this meeting to order. And I'd like to acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, Tla-o-qui-aht. And I'd just like to notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. And if there is no objection to adopting the agenda as presented, I will move adoption. Seeing no objection, motion is carried. Do we have public comment on agenda items, Elise? Or sorry, Ms. Scocher-Perkins.
Pardon me, I was muted there. Through the mayor, no one has signed up through the Q&A session. We'll leave it at that.
Great. Okay, we have 4.1 outdoor burning and firework amendment bylaws presented by Chief Baker.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Go ahead, Chief Baker.
I'll just take a moment and share my screen. I do have a brief presentation for you. All right, so hopefully we're all looking at a nice rainforest image there with the outdoor burning amendment bylaw on the screen. So council has asked that staff develop strategies to improve the management of the issues related to beach fires and amend the District of Tofino outdoor burning bylaw 1071/2008 in order to support beach fire management strategies discussed at the February 9th Committee of the Whole meeting. Staff has been working on increasing the fines related to outdoor burning, and once the amendments to the outdoor burning bylaw have been adopted, an enhanced signage and education program will commence to help familiarize the public with the changes. In addition to the issues involving beach fires, there has also been an increased number of complaints from the public about witnessed safety concerns, garbage, and noise disturbance from the use of consumer fireworks. Staff is also seeking a recommendation from council that staff be directed to make amendments to the Firearms and Fireworks Display Regulation Bylaw number 1219/2016 that will prohibit the use of consumer fireworks and increase the fines related to their unauthorized use. So just a few images here to remind us all of why it's time for change. So from heavy smoke on the beach to very, very large fires, excessive numbers of fires, and of course the driftwood that's getting burned and left behind for us to look at for a very long time. So the proposed amendments to the outdoor burning bylaw will include definitions of beach fires, definitions of the types of portable clean burning or reduced smoke fire appliances, introduction to beach fires as a type of regulated fire, requirements to use portable clean burning or reduced smoke fire appliances on all beaches, and a reduction in allowable hours for beach fires, and then new fines for beach fires not contained within a permitted appliance. So starting with definition, section 2 of the bylaw is where we'll find this. So a beach fire means any fire lit for the purpose of warmth, cooking, or ceremonial purposes located at any beach. Clean burning or reduced smoke fire appliance, a contained burning appliance that uses fuel such as propane or burns dry firewood and no other noxious materials raised off the ground with air introduced either mechanically or through ventilation openings to increase the heat and rate of burn and leaves little contamination while consuming fuel. So a few examples of possible permitted fire appliances. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have one that would be considered more high-end. This has a battery-powered fan to increase the airflow at a much greater rate. It has natural ventilation through the sides as well. Again, this one's a little bit more expensive, but this is about as close as you're going to get to actual clean burning and smokeless because of the way it functions. The two in the center are some examples of more simpler versions. There's no mechanical ventilation, but as you can see through the excessive ventilation holes on the sides and the bottom, again, it increases that airflow, reducing the amount of smoke because of a hotter burn. And then on the right-hand side, we have a good example of a propane fire ring, which are also still generally usable during a provincial fire ban. Proposed requirements, section 4, we're adding in part E to include beach fires as a regulated fire. And then section 6.1 outlines the requirements for those beach fires. So 6.1A, no person shall start, maintain, or gather around a fire that any beach fire not contained within a clean burning or reduced smoke fire appliance, and B, any beach fire between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. The new fines associated with section 6.1A and 6.1B of the outdoor burning bylaw: a beach fire not contained within a clean burning or reduced smoke fire appliance, the penalty is $200 with an early payment of $160 and a late payment of $240. And for a beach fire between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m., again, it's a penalty of $200 with early payment of $160 and late payment of $240. So how this fits with the provincial regulations: the province of BC requires that campfires in general, which basically a beach fire falls into that as far as the province is concerned, not be greater than 0.5 meters wide or 0.5 meters high. So these smaller portable appliances limit the size of wood that can be burned, and therefore the flame height as well. They require that fires be contained within a fire break or guard. And generally our beaches don't have much in the way of rocks on them. So those that are actually trying to meet that portion of the law tend to dig the pit down into the sand, which reduces the airflow, puts the smoke in a more damp environment, or puts the fire in a more damp environment, and then actually increases the amount of smoke with no airflow and more moisture in there. In conclusion, the changes to the outdoor burning bylaw 1071 and the associated fines in bylaw 1107.15 are intended to reduce the issues in our public spaces where the actions of one individual may affect hundreds of people. While many of the other communities on Vancouver Island have chosen to go with a complete prohibition on beach fires, staff are optimistic that visitors and residents will see these changes as a compromise in reducing the health and environmental concerns without sacrificing the experience of the coastal beach fire. We have 3 recommendations today. First one, that the District of Tofino Outdoor Burning Bylaw number 1071.02 2021, attached as Appendix 2 to the report dated April 26, 2021, sorry, it's entered twice there, be read a first, second, and third time. 2, that bylaw notice and dispute amendment bylaw 1107.15 2021, attached as Appendix 1 to the report dated April 26, 2021, be altered at third reading by including new fine amounts for outdoor burning infractions and removing Schedule 8 that I had previously entered in error. And the third one, that staff be directed to draft amendments to the Firearms and Fireworks Display Regulation Bylaw 1219/2016 to prohibit consumer fireworks as a means of improving the beach and community experience. And if there's any questions, I will just stop sharing my screen so that I can see you all.
Okay, we're going to open it up for questions for Brent. I'll take everybody. Tom, or sorry, Councillor Steer, you're first. Councillor Thick, you're second. Go ahead, Councillor Steer.
Great, thank you. Through the mayor. Thank you, Brent. Appreciate once again the tremendous amount of work that goes into this. And I just had a couple of questions, one regarding, or maybe comments more regarding the communications aspect of the bylaw for the fire burning. Part of the communications, and I'm just curious if added to those, one was the short-term rental association, if they would be sort of given a heads up, and the other was, and this was a curiosity question, if some of our retailers, potential retailers of those appliances, if they might be given a heads up as well, that they might be able to be purchased locally as well. I do see some potential for people showing up and then going, wow, we don't have access to these. So I'm just curious if that level of communication is there. And then I do have a follow-up question after that, if that's okay.
Sure. see if I can remember. So initially, well, first off, with regards to the vacation rental properties, I was in a meeting with the West Coast Resort Association group on Friday, even though it was in advance of this meeting, but they were curious about what the potential new regulations may be. There was a number of individuals representing the vacation rental businesses, Tofino, Tofino Vacation Rentals, and a few others that were on there. And so we talked about these possible things, also highlighted the fact that it has not been through council yet, so it may be subject to change. But all seemed quite open to this, and there will be further up communications depending on where we go from today. So everybody seems on board so far. The chamber has reached out and wanted to know a little bit about it as well too, so that it can be included through the ambassador program. And then Tourism Tofino also has expressed interest in collaborating for signage, both in public facing areas, but as well as supporting getting more signage onto the business properties in that. So definitely looking to connect with all aspects of the tourism industry to make sure people are as aware and prepared as possible. And then regarding the local retailers of these types of appliances, I know there's a few places in town where you can get the propane ones, so definitely be chatting with them about inventory and those sorts of things if we go ahead. And I've also been approached by a couple of resorts that are interested in possibly selling or renting units as well too, so that there's possibly a bit of an affordable aspect that those that are coming to visit may be able to rent one, possibly residents as well having the opportunity to rent one.
Awesome, thank you. And just a quick follow-up regards to the fireworks. I know that as that last amendment, we had those discussions. I was just curious, Brent, in that you're asking potentially for bringing forward prohibition. We do have a present bylaw that does deal with them, and don't quote me because I can't remember exactly, but I believe it's about 4 occasions that we allow at this point in time. And I'm wondering if 2 parts. One, if that bylaw will be amended, if there could be looking at amending that bylaw potentially. And the other question is, as we have with the fire, beach fire discussion, is there going to be a level of consultation with the community once similar, but maybe not as extensive, such as we had for fire burning?
Thank you. I definitely feel that there will be some information going out to the public, and I will absolutely be discussing with our CAO and the manager of corporate services as to specifically the level of correspondence or consultation that we'll engage with the public, just to make sure we're on the right track. Again, we discussed fireworks at this Resort Association meeting the other day as well, and most of my comments were met with a round of cheers. So I'm optimistic about that one. We would be looking to amend the firearms and fireworks bylaw. Currently, we do have 5 days out of the year where fireworks are allowed. And so there's 2 ways that it could go. It could go just a complete prohibition on all fireworks, or just on consumer fireworks. So if it's consumer fireworks, then what we do have the potential to still offer is display fireworks put on by a certified pyrotechnics engineer. I can't recall the specific term right off the top of my head, but there may still be that option.
Go ahead, Councillor Thick, and then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I had a question for Brent, and the question is, I'm assuming that this amendment doesn't change the fact that in the bylaw there are no fires currently allowed at Cox Bay and Tonquin Beach Park. Am I correct in assuming that that is still going to hold? Thank you.
100%. I don't have any intention of changing that. Those prohibitions in those 2 beach areas are for specific reasons, and this wouldn't change that.
Sorry, I can't hear.
I don't intend to make any changes to that. We would continue to prohibit fires at both Tonquin Beach and Cox Beach.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Anderson, I believe you're next.
Question first on the beach fires. When there's a provincial ban in effect, would that cover all these devices as well, including the propane, or would just the wood burning?
Just the wood burning. It would be standard that all wood burning fires, fireworks, tiki torches, those types of things would be banned. The province on their website does specifically say that CSA and ULC propane fire rings, like the one that I showed in the image in the slides, those are still acceptable during a provincial fire ban. Saying that, there's always the chance that in an extreme fire season that they may prohibit everything, but historically those have still been allowed.
Thank you. And then second, on the fireworks, is there any consideration given to requiring a permit for any fireworks displays? I'm thinking more around the New Year's and Canada Day displays. Some of the resorts have put on displays in the past. So I'm wondering, would that fall under the professional, whatever, pyrotechnics experts, or might we consider a permitting process as well?
I think that we would be going, if we're going to allow them in any way, like those particular instances, it would be a permit based, but only granted to certified pyrotechnics professionals. The resorts in the past, some of them have come to me to sort of review a safety plan and said, this is who's going to be doing it. Individuals, if we went that way, would have to show proof of certification, a complete safety plan. In the past, some of the fireworks put on at various places have not been done in that manner, and really have not had the oversight that they could have. And so I'd like to make sure that if we go that route where it is allowable under some circumstances, that there's a lot more oversight and thought put into carrying it off safely and having the proper planning in place.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question for Chief Baker before we move into discussion? Yes, Councillor Challenger. You're muted, I think, or you're not coming through here, Councillor Challenger. I don't see your mute on, so it might be something to do with your, there you go. Try it off again. Uh-oh, a technical glitch. Your mute is, I can see that your mute is on. Councillor McMaster, would you like to speak here while Councillor Challenger is working it out?
Yeah, Chief Baker, I might not be as optimistic as you are. Are you planning to review this at the end of the season with proposals for next year?
I think anything that we do, we should be prepared to review and evaluate and see how effective it is, and constantly look for alternate improved ideas. Absolutely.
And Councillor Challenger, would you like to try again?
Can you hear me now?
Hey, there you are.
Thanks.
We're good.
I actually had the same question as Duncan, and so thank you. And others I can leave for discussion.
And Councillor Chalmers, you're, would you like to say anything or wait for discussion?
Yeah, I have no questions. Thank you. I can wait for discussion.
Thank you, Chief Baker, for your presentation. And
Mayor, this is Elise speaking.
Yeah.
I have had two folks contact me through the Q&A session, letting me know that they were not clear on the protocols for the public comment period, and they would like to know if council is interested in hearing from two members of the public for 2 minutes each on this topic.
Being okay on this topic, okay. If there's no objections to allowing public comments, I will move they be allowed. Seeing no objections.
Thank you. Dennis and Diane, I'm going to call on Dennis first, and Dennis, I'll unmute you for up to 2 minutes if you'd like to speak. I'll be timing you and I'll let you know when to start. Dennis, you can unmute yourself and start at any time, and I will start timing 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for taking the time to hear me out today. I appreciate the council's time and the chief's detailed report. My name is Dennis Pellegrinos, and I own the home at 1375 Thornburg Crescent, which is formerly the Brymar Bed and Breakfast. I'm not sure if you're not familiar with the home. It actually backs onto South Chesterman Beach, and I'm affected by the beach fires as they happen, literally in my backyard, sometimes encroaching onto my property. I live with the noise and pollution on a daily basis, and I also clean up the area of the beach in front of my home, again, on a regular basis. I am completely okay with doing that because of the benefit that I think it actually provides to the community. The questions I had, I guess, in the chief's report, the first one, there was like there was a percentage of increase of complaints. I'm curious to what degree that was material. What percentage actually increased? The other question I had is the photos that were presented, the beaches that seem to be most affected, based on what I could infer, wasn't clear to me actually. So I was curious which beaches were affected. I believe there was also community feedback that was factored into some of this. So I had questions around to what degree that's being factored into a decision. And finally, I think that the chief mentioned that one of the appliances was on the pricier side. Do we have a range for what those appliances could cost? And do we have any thoughts on how that might actually preclude people who don't have the financial capability to participate as a consequence of not being able to afford those appliances? So thank you very much for your time. That's a little bit of context on the questions that I had. I'm happy to copy and paste them into the Q&A if it's easier to read them back again or recite them.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm going to mute you, and just so the public is aware, this section of the agenda is not for questions to council or for staff. It is for comments only. So if you do have questions for staff, I do encourage you to follow up through office@tofino.ca or the email address assigned to the Manager of Protective Services, if that's where your question is going tonight. Questions of council are also generally not responded to during this section. It is again for comment, and council will listen to your comments. So thank you, Dennis. And I'm going to move on to Diane Warren, the second speaker. Diane, I have let you unmute yourself. And if you'd like to go ahead for 2 minutes, I'll let you know when your time is up.
Okay. So I had a thought that possibly residents who have vacation rental or hotels or accommodation that are on the beaches could provide a fire pit of some sort for the residents to use, that they could maintain that fire pit. They could clean it and be responsible for it. Now, I wasn't sure if, are we completely banning wood fires? If you're continuing to have wood fires in the little receptacles that you have to buy, you would need to provide some kind of a receptacle for people to dump out their ashes and their burnt wood at the end of the night. So that might be an expense to the community, or, you know, to the district, to have some kind of a receptacle. Otherwise, people will just dump their stuff wherever. I think I had a few other questions that I had typed in, but I don't have it in front of me at the moment. I just would like, rather than come down really hard and have an all-out ban, to try to gather up some information from the local residents and get some of their ideas of how people could be more responsible, or to try to make this work without a complete ban. And I think that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Diane. I'm going to mute you now, and we'll return to the rest of the process of the agenda.
I'd like to thank Dennis and Diane for speaking up and having your voices heard. Perhaps some of those questions during our discussions, council may take the time to answer. I do have, before we get into council discussion here, I do have a comment on one item here, and I'm going to share my comment with you from the chair, and then I'm going to get your feedback about it. And my comment surrounds the direction to amend fireworks and firearms and fireworks display regulation to prohibit consumer fireworks as a means of improving the beach. Now, I'm just going to throw this by council because we've been working on a outdoor burning bylaw for some time, I believe since last February or previous February. And it's gone through fairly extensive staff, council, and public discussion and input. And here we are today. We have not given the same thought, public input, and council discussion to a ban on fireworks or personal fireworks. So in my mind, I think this requires a fulsome discussion. I know council members have various opinions and would like the chance to discuss and direct council. I certainly would. So personally, I would like to take the discussion of fireworks to something like a committee of the whole to have a more fuller discussion, because I know there's only two recommendations, I believe, that Chief Baker talked about, which was a complete ban or a ban just on personal fireworks. And I think, as Councillor Anderson points out, there's other options that council have not discussed, such as permits for individuals. I know that in other places like Vancouver and Surrey, they do that for individuals who can apply for permits. So this is a question I have for council. Does council want to discuss fireworks along with this burning bylaw right now, or can we move this to a greater, fuller discussion at a committee level? Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you for that, Mayor Law. And maybe a question for Chief Baker, but it's my understanding that this recommendation does bring us back to where we were originally with outdoor burning, in that it is the first step. So Chief Baker would then bring a proposal to us. We would be able to look at the proposal, and then it goes through all the steps. Whereas where we're at right now with the outdoor burning is actually getting to first, second, and third adoption. So when I read it, I was kind of looking at that separate. We're directing staff now to start the process, but please correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Baker.
Yeah, that would be correct.
In which case, then I am supportive of continuing in this manner, because it will allow us to have that conversation that you're looking for, Mayor Law.
I just want to clarify that again, Chief Baker. This recommendation is that staff be directed to draft an amendment to prohibit consumer fireworks. So I believe that this is a fairly directive recommendation, not to discuss it or look for other options. So I just want to is that the case, Chief Baker?
That is how I have it written in there, yes. I would have to double check with Elise as far as the protocol. It doesn't have to be accepted at that point. I could be directed to come to a committee of the whole, but I've had some feedback from some of council and a lot from the community asking for working towards these steps, and so that's why I have it in there right now, to try and get the conversation going. But I'm open to whichever direction council would like to go. So.
Anybody have a comment on that? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
I think if we just change the recommendation slightly to some, once we get to it, the third recommendation, just read to prohibit or otherwise restrict consumer fireworks. That would sort of, I think, broaden a little bit the direction to staff to allow for some of this other discussion to come in.
Any other councillors have a comment on that before we move on? Councillor Steer and Councillor Thick.
Thank you, Mayor Law. Maybe just direct it towards Chief Baker again. Would that be enough direction, as Councillor Anderson proposed, within there to provide a slightly broader context to the proposed recommendation by the inclusion of otherwise prohibit or otherwise restrict consumer fireworks?
I feel I'm able to work with that.
Councillor Thick, I believe you were next. You're on mute, Councillor Thick.
Sorry, I was agreeing with Councillor Chalmers, and I felt that even within the scope of what was being asked, that we had the freedom to come back with something different. So I'm happy with either way. Thank you.
Okay. Then I will not make a motion to refer this to committee of the whole. It seems like there's enough people that are comfortable with amending that recommendation to include a clause there to allow for further discussions. Then I will leave that alone and carry on to a discussion of the outdoor burning amendment. Is there any questions, comments from council we'd like to discuss? Councillor Challenger.
Thank you. So thanks, Chief Baker, for your the detailed report. And I did have some questions around accessibility as well, so similar to some of the community members who spoke. However, after doing some of my own research, as well as speaking with Chief Baker, I do find myself in favor of the bylaw. Especially knowing that there are some resorts and accommodation providers who will be renting these units, and hopefully that will be for both residents and visitors. And I think what I've found is even within the wood burning receptacles or appliances, they do range from $150 up to an indefinite amount, really, but there are ones that you can find that are on, especially if you're purchasing with friends, more of an affordable amount. So I hope that we can recognize that this is a compromise and kind of meeting in a place where we're not banning beach fires completely, but instead doing it in a more responsible way on many levels. I love beach fires too, so in a perfect world, we'd be able to have them. And I think just to recognize that we live in a town where it's not sustainable to continue in the way that we have been. So thank you.
Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you. And I actually have another question for Chief Baker. It brought up from one of the questions as well. And I believe it was mentioned at the last COW meeting regarding this, but is there a thought for disposal of wood and coals afterwards?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm glad it's been asked a few times. So one of the things about having a big fire, which we're trying to restrict, is that a big fire has a lot of waste, and I can definitely see the need to try and figure out what to do with all that unburnt wood. When you're using one of the smaller receptacles and it's actually burning the way that it's supposed to at a higher heat and that sort of thing, you actually have surprisingly minimal waste. And so when you stick to that, many of these can accommodate 4 small pieces of firewood in there. So we're not piling it high because there's no barrier on how much we can put in there. It means that there's going to be less waste naturally. And so some of it comes down to the user, that you figure out how long you want to stay there and you burn your fire accordingly. There is also still the requirement for people to have their water with them in order to put the fire out, and those sorts of things as well too. So we shouldn't really have to be dealing with hot ash because it is expected to be put out. So I think it should be much less of a problem than it is currently, because as it burns through the ash, if it's vented through the holes in that, the ash will fall through as it's too small, and then you're just left with small pieces of wood that you can then put out. So.
Thank you. And then in that case, I'm supportive of the recommendation as written, and I really appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I think we've come to a good compromise from where we started out with this, and I'm happy with it.
Any other councillors like to talk to the outdoor burning? No. Oh, Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought Councillor Challenger put it very well and clearly, so I agree with those comments. I think we've had a great public and council and staff discussion around this, and we've arrived at a good compromise and I support the recommendations. Just to address some of the speakers today, I'm not in support of if you're lucky enough to own a property next to the beach, of having a sort of a permanent setup and maintained fire pit in front of your property. The beach is public property and is for use of everyone, and I think that sort of annexes a piece of beach for private use, which I'm not in support of. Certainly any of the beach properties can build a fire pit on their own property and allow their guests to use that fire pit. So I think we've come to the best solution to minimize the hazards of beach fires and the problems that we've identified around them. So I'm in support of the recommendations. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. And just want to let people know too that I know Councillor Challenger pointed to some commercial units from 150 all the way up to, you know, in the hundreds, many hundreds. And I have two clean burning fireplaces. One's in my front yard, and it was handmade by a fellow here in town, Ole Hansen, and it works absolutely wonderful, and I love it, and I'll never go back. And I also have a small one that cost me actually $30, and I use it camping, and it's very small and compact, and I again will never go back. It really does reduce the waste. They do create a great fire. So there's lots of options for people, including handmade units that cost very little to very expensive. And I do feel that it will allow people to have fires, which is what we were hoping for, is that we could still have fires. This is a compromise for certain, but I think in the end it'll be a good compromise, and that people will catch on and we'll see the benefits of this with clean beaches and less smoke. So that's where I was coming from with that. So it is not a fire ban. We are not banning fires. We're not banning wood fires. We're allowing wood fires, and we're giving people a way to have them that's cleaner and better for the environment, better for the beaches. So it is a compromise. I'm in favor of this. Councillor Chalmers.
Sure, I'll be happy to move the recommendation that the District of Tofino Outdoor Burning Amendment Bylaw number 107 1.02 2021 attached as Appendix 2 to the report dated April 26, 2021 be read a first, second, and third time. You're muted.
Seconded by Councillor Thick. Any further discussion? All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion is carried.
Okay, then I'll move that staff be directed to draft amendments to the firearms and fireworks display regulation bylaw number 1219 2016 to prohibit and or potentially restrict consumer fireworks as a means of improving the beach and community experience, to prohibit and further restrict consumer fireworks.
Second.
Any further comments? I do have one further comment actually that I would like to say on this one, is that I personally am opposed to banning personal fireworks for the days that are already allotted. And so I hope that is included in the discussion that comes forward, that all views can be heard. And that is my final comment. Councillor McMaster. You're still muted, Councillor McMaster.
Did we miss a recommendation? I think there's 3 recommendations there. And I think we've just done 2.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. Well, let's carry on with this one. Maybe we'll go back to, let's carry on with this one because we're in the middle of it. So if there's no further comment on this one, which is actually recommendation 3, we will, all in favor? None opposed, motion's carried. And let us go back to recommendation number 2.
I can do that. That the amendment, so wait, I did the second one first, didn't I? I skipped the first one.
I think you might have actually. Where's our,
That the amendment to bylaw notice and dispute amendment bylaw number 1107.15 2021 at third reading to include new fine amounts and remove Schedule 8 be approved as shown in Appendix 1 to the report dated April 26, 2021, and that bylaw notice and dispute amendment bylaw number 1107.15 2021 be read a third time as amended.
excellent.
Second.
Any further comments? All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion's carried. Thank you, Chief Baker.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, moving along, we have a presentation from Mr. Work.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Fraser Work. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works here at the District of Tofino. And tonight for the second event is a workshop on pay parking and other parking system improvements that I'd like to walk Council through using a set of PowerPoint slides. The way that I've structured the presentation tonight is I've lightened up the slides on the front end a bit and allowed us to pull stuff from the back end if we want to deep dive in certain areas. So my presentation really focuses on the essential elements of the report. And I wish to, if with the Mayor's approval, allow discussion at each slide before moving on in a more workshop format and a bit more of an engaging dialogue format. I know on the Zoom portal here, I may not see hands go up or other things when I'm on a share screen, but I think I'll do my best to answer and take any questions on the fly on that particular slide, and I'll ask for permission before I leave and move to the next slide. Like I said, when we get to the end, there's still slides allocating details, which there's a lot in the appendices. It's a pretty info-rich report. A lot of specifics in there that if council wishes to talk about a specific location, we can jump around and dive into that location with its own dedicated slide. That's sort of after my question slide as per the deck. So if Mayor Law and council think that that's a reasonable way forward, I'll start sharing screen and jump into the presentation and basically allow for that dialogue on each slide if that format's agreeable to council.
How is that for council? Anybody opposed? Seeing none. Go ahead, Mr. Work.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Law. I'll just share my screen here and move to this presentation, and I'll just ask for a thumbs up once I get it to presentation mode and back up to the title slide. So as is the case with my particular savvy on the old IT, I see my slide with about four people's faces on the right-hand side, which means I'll often be covered up on the right-hand picture on the slide, but I'll do my best. And please don't be hesitant or be shy when it comes to interrupting me for this discussion, because there's quite a bit to go through, and I think it'd be very difficult to try to go back and talk about some of these issues after the fact.
And I just have a little technical pointer to people. If I can't see everybody, so unless you can move the little slider in your screen over so that you can see everybody, then I'll be able to see you, and everybody put their hands up, and I'll try to keep you in order.
Thanks, Mayor Law. And again, if I find that there's quite a bit of discussion, it may be most appropriate for me to exit the share screen option and have that discussion and dive back in the presentation, similar to what we did during budget. So I'll try to do that, but please, if that's a preferred option, I haven't done that, please give me a shout out and I'll make that change. I'll also do my best to flip through the report and reference some of the pages that we're on, just in case that helps council going back and forth with some of the content. So today, just the purpose of this report is to get council's direction as to the next phase of introduction of the pay parking system and also a set of configuration and improvements that are proposed in the report. This discussion was requested and made as a commitment as part of the budget discussions at the early parts of 2021, and also following on from the discussions in the first budgetary discussions and financial plan management discussions in late 2020. So there's a set of parking problems that we're trying to solve. On page 4 of the report, these are all outlined and expanded on in a little bit more detail, but very quickly, we of course have a very high demand for a limited supply of parking. We also suffer from an inefficient use of available space in many areas of especially at the beaches, where a tighter configuration of parking will improve the utility of that space and maximize the utility of the space that we currently have allocated to parking. We have some instances where there's a commercialization and privatization of public space, whether businesses are using public space for commercial gains, or private entities might be using public spaces for the frequent and routine storage of vehicles, which is largely considered in the planning world as the lowest and worst use of land. So it's something that we, if we're conscientious about how we're allocating space to the highest public good, often we can find ourselves struggling with some of the allocations of parking space and the management of those spaces. In many cases, we have unclear or incomplete signage and direction, which we should improve to improve the performance of the parking system. We often find ourselves having frequent users gaining access to public space, but also at the sacrifice for others that wish to access those locations or those amenities that are next to those parking facilities. We have many who will choose or potentially accidentally abuse parking rules and directions that are signed or part of the infrastructure. We have, of course, several safety concerns with respect to informal and improper parking, whether that's interruption of sight lines and safety configurations and space that other users rely on to transition safely through and around parking areas. We have a significant wear and tear on our public infrastructure. We often will see instances on highly dense parking areas that are collapsing ditches and reducing the effectiveness of a lot of our drainage in our community, which is of course essential for moving water, and especially in the winter peak seasons of rain and storm. We have a challenge finding attractive alternatives for recreational vehicles to park in and around our community that allow them to access those waterfront or different locations, but also can store vehicles in a way that's systematic, clean, tidy, and better for other users. We also continue to make strides and improvements in sustainable mobility alternatives, and most notably the terrific amenity that is the MUP, as well as the introduction of shuttles and different transit programs, which we're working on also between private shuttles as well as BC Transit introduction of service. But increases and gains in that area will definitely take away from parking demand and move people out of single occupant vehicles into other modes. And finally, we have the affordability of parking overall, not just for the user as parking affordability goes, but for the district to maintain and upgrade our parking and road infrastructure and our services that are attached to parking, like washrooms, pavement, boulevards, pathways, etc. So there's some pictures on the right there which illustrate some parking fails in many respects, or just the patterns of parking that happen. I'll try to mention some of my pictures as I go, just so that the mysteries are not gone without saying about how those pictures might help us in our dialogue as we go through the different slides. So with that, that concludes my little bit here on parking intro, which is the issue slide, and I'll move on to my next slide. Okay, hearing no shout outs, here I go. So overall, we have two raw approaches that we could test for improving parking. We could either increase supply or reduce demand, or both. As I said, vehicle storage is not considered the best use of high value real estate, which of course all of our land is. And really what we're recommending as part of this report is a continued investment in sustainable modes, as well as the introduction of a more sophisticated and well-configured user pay parking scheme. So this report and this discussion focuses primarily on number 2, which is in blue, for us to step through that in a little bit more detail. The picture on the right is the South Chesterman beach lot You can see the public works vehicle on the left, but you can also see a dump truck in the background, a couple of vehicles driving through the parking lot, and a bunch of other ones very well spaced across. And although that's not in a high demand that day, you can definitely see that there are some configuration and infrastructure improvements to jam a few more spots in that particularly large open space of gravel. Again, just before I go on, any comments on this? These are a bit boilerplatey, I know. So, a sort of snapshot overview of what we're.
Sorry, Mr. Work. I think Councillor Steer had his mute off.
No, thank you, Mayor Law. I just wanted to, it's okay, but I was just going to point out that in fact, it is concentrating on the lowering of demand, but through your efficiency, you are actually increasing supply, but I didn't need to say it, but thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Steer. That's exactly what the point I was trying to make. Thanks for kind of saying it more succinctly than I did. The next slide here really does sort of try to encapsulate what we're proposing. And in one slide, which is having both a physical and digital parking payment infrastructure set that can allow for parking transactions and access to parking at the locations that are in the right-hand column. This third-party service is envisioned to include both the digital and the physical infrastructure to allow the parking transactions and management of parking pay systems to work, as well as the provision of enforcement management services that includes both citation and dispute resolution services, a set of customer service and experience to meet our standards and our requirements, as well as the operations and maintenance of the pieces that are essential for that system to work, and include other things like data and reporting, metrics and analytics, and moving in the future to potentially to enhanced levels of service like real-time parking availability and that kind of thing, which we would be seeking to explore in the first phases, but potentially deliver in the future. The parking locations that we're talking about, just so we're clear, are the beach parking locations, beach zones and roads that are accessing beach zones, and the 2 municipal hall surface lots, which have already been in a configuration of pay parking. So that list then is Cox Bay Maltby Road, 1431 Pacific Highway Beach Parking Lot, South Chesterman Lot, Chesterman Beach Road, Lynn Road, North Chesterman Lot, Osprey Lane, Municipal Hall surface lots, Hellison Road, the beach access area, and then the end of the Tonkin Park Road, which is the trailhead for the beach. So that is the extent of what we're recommending as a staff group. Mayor?
Sorry, I was just going to put my hand up for just to ask you questions when you're done this on this slide.
Okay, I'm done on this slide.
Good timing. Sure, I have 2 questions. One is the third-party service provider. That would still allow us to have control over parking fees, et cetera, et cetera. So we would still be able to set those rates.
That's affirmative. The rates would be set by the district, and the overall directions of the parking system would be set by the staff team with input and direction from mayor and council. And I think that's a fairly standard approach for these third-party service providers, and that was written in the original request for information, the RFI, and similar language would also accompany the RFP if we were approved to go through that. So, and I would also just caveat that with, we would potentially seek recommendations or advice from the parking service provider who has lots of experience in managing these things, potentially much more than we do, on rate structures and rate schemes that were appropriate for us at the district in whatever phase of introduction we were at.
Great, and my second question is these parking enforcement management, does that include, would it be our bylaw officers handing out tickets and then those citations being managed by a third party, or is this a actual the third party bylaw officer or parking officer?
What we're envisioning here is that the enforcement function would be completely met by third party services for these locations. We still have lots of parking in our district that has to be managed and enforced using some bylaw staff, but we would be looking at relying on third-party services that were driving around in vehicles that had the most advanced technology, likely a license plate recognition type of hardware and software system that allows them to use a minimum amount of human and machinery and assets to actually cover the most amount of ground. So in other communities, we've seen successes in this area where they would have a car with the license plate recognition software on top that looks a little bit like a police light or a transit type of inspector kind of vehicle. And it takes pictures of the license plate in the system. It says that that license plate is paid for to be in that place and time, and then they carry on about their rounds. And in the request for information, that type of capability was affirmed by the different people that submitted their information, the different agencies, excuse me, and clearly said that that's a type of technology that's very common in the industry right now for them to be able to use maybe a single driver for that type of a routine. So we would be looking at freeing up a lot of our bylaws to do their work in the order of priority, but I would just sort of caution expectations, saying that we still have lots of vehicles related issues and matters that would require bylaws attention in and around the other zones that wouldn't necessarily be subject to this particular contract, which would start out as covering just the beach parking and potentially expansion into downtown next year.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council before I leave this slide? Again, I can only see 4 faces on my current screen.
I believe we have Councillor Thick has her hand up as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I haven't been part of all the conversations leading up to this moment in time, but on this slide, you say, Fraser, about the pay parking system, and there's only one alternative given. I'm just wondering, for the benefit of those who have advocated for the pay parking pass system, can you give a little bit more background, maybe just for me, or maybe for those who are interested in this, why this particular system, the third-party service provider, as opposed to the parking pass notion that has been put forward prior to this, or in conjunction with this idea? Thank you.
Through the mayor, if I understand correctly, I think there is a slide or two later that talk about the annual passes and expand on that in a little bit more detail. On a daily basis, people will come to these beaches to visit and to access those coastal amenities from all kinds of places. Sometimes a day trip from a people that maybe will only come here once in a very long time. Other times it could be daily trips for dog walkers that live in community. Other times it could be international tourists, post-COVID kind of climate back to normal. So we would see people from the island, from the mainland, from across Canada and across the world. In many cases, a significant majority, I would say, of the people accessing the beaches, especially during the summer peak and the tourist high points, would be accessing those and interested in only buying several hours at a time, or maybe a day ticket or a week ticket. Whereas the more local community that lives here on the West Coast, or even within the ACRD, would potentially be coming here so regularly that it would make sense for them to get access to like a reduced rate or a discounted annual pass. We plan on making all of those available through a permit system, whether that's an annual subscription or annual pass, that would be virtually tied to that same license plate type of program. So if you show up at the beach and you're here with your family just for the day, and that's the only time you're coming here for the year, for example, you would just go to the kiosk and tap a payment, or you would go on the app digitally and say, I want to park at Cox Bay Maltby for 3 hours, and I'm going to buy this pass, and then onwards and upward they go on for their tour across the island. Whereas the community dog walkers would have subscribed to this annual pass program that we offer, potentially managed through the same set of software and same service providers as a third-party contractor. And then that pass would be tied to their annual subscription and their license plate, so that when they were visiting North Chesterman, maybe in the morning to go for a walk, the parking enforcement vehicle would pass by and it would show that license plate as being an annual pass subscriber, and they could be basically anywhere they want for as long as they want, unless we set some other restrictions, and there's a bit of talk later on. So Councillor Thick, does that sort of kind of talk about how the different passes might work? And again, with me suggesting that I'll dive into the rates of the fare free types of passes later.
Yeah, for now, thank you. That's good.
Okay. If there's any other questions on this slide, please let me know. Otherwise, I can jump to the next. Oh, okay. So here we go on the annual pass, a little bit more detail. What staff are are recommending as part of the report and proposing for discussion with council at this time is that the Tofino residents and the local First Nations would be able to access an annual beach parking pass as they wish for the first inaugural year, and then switch to a basic fare in 2022 that covered at least the administrative overheads of administering the pass. The reason that I feel that that's a smart recommendation is because there's both a change management element to moving to a pay parking system, which I think needs to respond to and address the strong demand for free parking for locals, albeit it can often be a bit tricky to define what a local is. And in some cases, in order to administer the pass, either a combination of staff and contracted resources will be required in order to actually sift through those types of proof paperwork and get those passes or those license plates in the system. And because of the cost, and because of one of the principles of a user pay parking system is that users pay and nothing is taken for granted, essentially, which is at the heart of a lot of the parking issues, I feel that it's professionally more defensible to move towards a basic fare in future years, but also defensible to have the first year free as we move through the change process, reduce the administrative burden of potentially having to manage all those things, as well as get some buy-in from the users and get some important feedback and keep everybody engaged in the discussion. So that's the rationale, and council that has been talking about this with staff for the last couple of months would have been in a discussion where we kind of debated a little bit about, you know, should there be a fare that covers overhead or should it be free, that kind of thing. So that little tidbit that I just parlayed there was really in response to that last discussion and a bit of a segue to what's written on the slide here. So the reason, there's also a couple of important other pieces of information on this slide. So that fare free, and I say fare free because nothing's free. Whether we say it's free for somebody to pay, we're still paying for it in a different way. So I use those words carefully. But the 4-hour maximum stay per trip is really an effort to make sure that people don't linger in those parking spots that we're actually trying to introduce a system to increase turnover. And we wanted to find a sweet spot where the vast majority of single trips wouldn't necessarily fall above what we would recommend, and also that it would incent a little bit of turnover so that other people that are circulating the block trying to find a parking spot and unload all their gear can still get in there and get access to it. Will it fit everybody's needs every time? No, but I think it might be a reasonable landing spot, and also support it as a 4-hour does sit just outside of what a normal surf school lesson is, which is about 3 hours, 3 hours 15, 3 hours 20 minutes, which will feed into my next slide here. So another piece of rationale, the next slide has a set of comments about others passes, as well as, and I'll stop talking here in 1 sec, other passes, as well as commercial vehicle passes. That's on the next slide. And what we're trying to do is come up with something that sort of has the right spacing on the costs, as well as the right kind of restrictions. And you'll notice on those little footnotes there, the intent would be, based on staff's understanding right now, is to make this available for passenger vehicles that are registered to people and private residents, and with someone that can prove that they're a resident. Councillor McMaster said at our last discussion that it will be very difficult in some cases to prove who's a resident, especially if they've just arrived here, if they've only been here for 8 months, if they don't have a bill in their name, or they don't have something on their license plate. And here what we're saying is BC registered vehicles only, which is going to be interesting also, but I think that would promote a shift in a lot of other areas that we would like to see. So I'll stop talking there, take some questions, and just to let council know that there's another slide that continues this from the pages in your report that are on page 7. So I saw some questions there.
Councillor Chalmers has her hand up, Mr. Work.
Thank you, Mr. Work. In your footnote about, I think it's great that First Nations communities in Long Beach and offshore communities are included in the resident passes. And I wonder if it'd be worth including U-Q-aht, as there are many residents of Tofino that work out there and vice versa, that live there and work here. So being able to go for beach walk on your lunch or something like that would be maybe nice to include them in the conversation.
Thank you, through the mayor. The ACRD designation was intending to capture other West Coast residents that weren't Tofetians. The rationale behind not having U-Q-aht residents inside of the Tofino residents was to single out Tofino residents with the most privilege when it comes to this program, and also to basically be distinctive in saying that there is a difference between somebody that lives here and wants to access our local beaches and somebody that doesn't want to. We had lots of talk at the staff level, especially lots of talk with certain residential stakeholders about Yuki being a West Coast sort of local, and my intention wouldn't be to see off someone from Yuki that comes here lots, but I think I think some people would consider it less appealing to have them grouped in with the whole West Coast rather than it be a real benefit for the Tofino residential community. Other people would see it as they should definitely include everybody on the West Coast. So I think it's really up to council to determine how you'd like to go here. We also have other communities that, I think we have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, whether that was Port Alberni or, and what was in that net of that fare free inaugural year. But we've sort of tried to distinguish between the maximum privilege for the first year going to Tofino residents and the First Nation communities, with a very inexpensive but reasonable cost for ACRD, which would potentially access our facilities at a much higher frequency than others on the island, and then kind of out in the bubble from there. So I hope that helps a little bit. It's kind of a very debatable set of kind of constraints.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Councillor Steer has his hand up. Mr. Work.
Thank you, Mayor Law. Ms. Works, I just quickly, I recognize the difficulty in ascertaining local resident status, and I think I'll need more information somewhere in this process as to how we will go about delineating that. And I know that there's been some preliminary discussions around that, but it is certainly a concern at the top of my head right now in terms of how we will definitively go about addressing who is local and who is not. So no need for an answer right now, but just to know that that is a concern and that I'll be looking for that information later.
Thank you, Councillor Steer.
And Councillor Anderson has his hand up, and then I do have a question or a comment.
I'm just wondering if it's possible to have a sort of a category of unemployment or situation, a worker's pass, or something like that. There may be people living anywhere in the ACRD or Port Alberni, Ucluelet, that work here and need to park on a regular basis. So that might be sort of another category of pass, or worker's pass. I don't know.
Thanks, Mayor, or thanks, Councillor Anderson. I think that there's a possibility when working with the third-party service provider to have virtual passes that are somewhat more tailorable beyond just an annual pass. So maybe there's a monthly configuration there, or a pass booklet of some kind that would potentially capture and sort of privilege or benefit some of those other cases. And I think, as you probably all are, I'm thinking of the amount of administrative calories in order to administer each pass, and trying to keep that down to a very low level without seeing a whole bunch of people off that otherwise need help and services that are specific to their needs. So trying to find that sweet spot, I think we would have to rely on some of these professionals. And we've been talking to different parking management professionals over the last month or so in order to try to help with that. But I'll definitely keep that suggestion in mind about not necessarily just a time restricted or a time allocated pass, but maybe a user group type of approach for some cases.
Thank you. And I just had a quick comment. I do agree with maybe an expanded view of Ucluelet residents or ACRD residents or workers. But I also had a comment about the 4-hour maximum stay for residents, and I'd really hate to see, a resident stay for 5 hours and get a parking ticket for it. So just throwing that out there, that let's keep that in mind. If residents do stay a little longer or something like that, if there is a fine, I hope that it's not exorbitant.
Understood. Mayor Law, can you help me if there's any other questions on this particular side, or I could jump to the
other hands up. No other hands up here, Mr. Work.
Okay, so the the next one, I think will also have a set of interesting comments on it. So another visitor pass, which in this case is a little bit more expensive than what you get for an annual pass in the park. So for about I think a family pass, annual pass, I paid $89 for the year for my Pacific Rim National Park pass. This is a little bit more expensive than that, with again a rate review in 2022. It gives a little bit of that distinctive kind of range between the benefits you'd get if you were a West Coaster and you were getting that $60 rate, or then you were just maybe you were someone else that just loved to come to Tofino once in a while, but not necessarily be a cost prohibitive rate. So that was the sort of rationale, although the approximate sign gives it definitely some woolly nature to it. That should be a fuzzy font if I was to choose a font, but that's there for our initial dialogue. And then perhaps a little bit more interesting of a discussion or debate is around the commercial vehicle. So the way that I've been thinking about this over the last little bit, and some discussions with the surf school community as of late, was you have commercial vehicles of different types. We have maybe I think about them now in 3 different types. We have a vehicle that's used almost for private use, but it's registered to a business. We have vehicles that are discreetly used for business activity, maybe trades or medium duty vehicles that have nothing to do with the beach as their business model. And then we have a series of commercial vehicles that come to the beach and access the beach on a daily basis, that they're dependent or reliant on the beach as their business. We've seen all of those in play every single day. The first one is sort of invisible. The second one, which is like, medium duty vehicles, might be trades parking on the road, doing renovations or servicing the properties nearby. Maybe the trades using that as their daily driver and actually accessing the beach for recreating outside of their working hours. And then we have the commercial surf schools and some of the different vehicles that are used as part of their business model to deliver people to the beach and equipment to the beach, which in some cases is a sort of a unique one. So what I've done here is maybe a little bit less assertive by giving a range, and also the commitment to adjust or review that in 2022. With that this is where the 4-hour maximum stay originated from. And originally I had it as 3 hours, and I was told that would actually see off most normal lessons. So I was convinced that 4 hours would be a better, reasonable starting point. And also the need that we may want to designate certain parking for certain vehicle use, which was on the request of the surf schools. As of their early request initially would be that they had reserved stalls, which then could possibly go empty and actually be unavailable for others, which is a challenge to manage. So I think what I've said here in the last bullet on the second set was review and exploration of surf instruction commercial beach operator permits. A program in the future years might be what we need. That's more tied to the business license and the allocation of that business to use the beach as their private interest landscape. And we may not actually be able to manage all the things we want to manage via this kind of parking annual pass rate. So on that note, I think I'll stop talking there and ask for council's considerations, some direction or questions and queries.
Questions from council on this one for Mr. Work? Councillor Steer, and then Councillor Thick.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would just have some concerns right off the bat about allocating specific stalls for businesses. So right away, that doesn't play too well for a variety of reasons. So I would have some difficulty doing that. And trying to establishing a rate for those commercial vehicles is a fairly broad rate. Of course, I would tend to move towards the higher end of it because it is a very valuable commodity that is being offered to these businesses, and it should be priced appropriately.
Thanks, Councillor Steer. Can I ask maybe just a follow-on question there? There's also restricting sites where those commercial vehicles may not be welcome to use certain sites in certain locations. We have some vehicle size issues in some cases, but when you had mentioned that you weren't necessarily in favor of reserving spots for them, but I would also offer up to council's consideration that a restriction on areas or a preference for areas might be something that we should consider as well in the management of space.
Yeah, I would concur that I would be comfortable with a restriction, because there's certainly areas where it would be inappropriate to park some of those larger vehicles for a variety of reasons, safety being the first one coming to mind. But so, yeah, I would have to think about that one a bit more, but certainly understanding that there's probably more appropriate locations for those sort of larger commercial vehicles to be utilizing. And I don't know, though, once again, if allocating a very specific space for them within those areas would be the appropriate course of action. I'd have to give it a bit more thought, but that's my initial thought.
Councillor Thick?
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking about that, what you said, Mr. Work, about the commercial vehicle. Would it have to be reinforced or restated in the business license bylaw? Is that what you're saying, that we would need to look at that as well, or would it be captured in this, just in this permitting process that we're speaking about now? Thank you.
Through the mayor, I admit I don't necessarily have a thorough response to that, although I have cast my mind to it a little bit. I think that whatever this rate system does for us, it really is managing business activities in a way, and it should be complementary and integrated with the business licensing process. We may choose that the business license process doesn't need to change because it's perfectly doing what it's supposed to do, but I would just recommend that would be something for me to go back and to talk to the other departments and make sure that we had a smart plan, a defensible plan, and the appropriate kind of mix of restrictions, constraints, directions. If we were to go down this review of these types of parking constraints for businesses, where those two worlds kind of collide. So if Mayor Law, if council's okay for me to move on, I can go on to some of the next bits here.
I just saw Councillor Anderson's hand go up there, so maybe one more question for the side.
Yeah, I've just a suggestion. Maybe there's nothing there, but I'm just wondering what Parks Canada does with possible surf school operations or any other business operations, if they have a different user fee for that, or if it just happens and they pay regular parking rates or user rates. There might be some guidance we can take from them. Suggestion, that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. I'll look into that for sure.
And just to be clear, Mr. Work, you're actually working with surf schools and businesses to come up in discussion with possibilities. Is that correct?
Thanks, Mayor Law. That is affirmative. We had our first meeting last Wednesday with the surf schools exclusively, with some support from the Chamber and tourism staff to help us navigate the first discussions, just to give really an update on where things were going, that we were going to be meeting with council and that we would be coming back to them with some more questions, comments, directions. They made a set of comments that were really value added, questions about how this would be administered. And they were really, I think one of the key takeaways that I had anyway from the discussion was I think they're really keyed into and sort of concerned about how they can access certain spaces, certain locations, and they want to obviously work with us, and they're really good. So I'll look forward. We have our second discussion with the surf schools planned for next week.
Thank you. That's it for questions.
Okay. This is a highlight slide that aims to kind of summarize. It's still got a ton of text on there. Sorry, but a lot of my slides are pretty text heavy, because otherwise I would have been splitting up the discussion in a kind of an unruly way as we step through the issues, albeit kind of a lot to digest and aesthetically not so pleasing. But this is a slide that's seeking to highlight that large appendix 1 that has all of the different breakdown by locations, which has, here's the current configuration, here's the issues we want to tackle, and here's some of the recommended way forwards. This is a snapshot of some of the kind of more maybe significant or interesting or contentious changes. And so, but like I said before, I'm more than happy for us to dive into each of these locations with its own specific slide. And what I have coming up on the next couple slides is this particular one here Then I have this change management, which is kind of an issues that we want to manage slide, and then an engagement plan and the recommendations. So, and then there's the backdrop that I have that I can pull forward by location. So if council is okay with it, I'll just basically highlight this. And again, please don't be shy. If you do want to go to one of the locations specifically, I can bring up that slide. So Cox Bay Maltby Road, I think the biggest change that we would be proposing would be getting the parking configuration in there tidied up in a big way. And then of course we've got to manage that interface we have with Maltby Road and the adjacent landowner who we've had a series of conversations with and are continuing to engage with, because to the parker and to the user currently, you kind of migrate off of public property into private property without really knowing where you're at or what's what. So whatever we choose to do in here has to be the right legal thing, the right thing for both parties, or a great compromise. And also something that has to take into consideration that really valuable real estate for parking in there, because as we know in the summer peaks, this is a very, very busy place that spills out onto the highway. And we want to make sure that we have as many parkers captured in that available space as possible. And there's some real safety concerns in that highway. So I think that's kind of the summary of the main challenge at the Cox Bay location. The Pacific Rim Highway 1431, that's our most well-organized, it's our only paved parking surface lot at the moment in the beach locations. And it's quite well organized, albeit it's very small. What we see here is a very strong demand desire lines for parkers that spills out on the highway. We're continually working with MOTI on possible interventions that they would accept. And we met with them on site very recently, and I was on the phone with MOTI on Friday talking about these issues. So we do want to get to a system that, in my mind, my preference is to have a certain amount of authorized parking along the highway near 1431. I haven't had that reflected back to me as the way forward yet. I continue to fight for that. And my assessment with a transportation professional recently suggests that we're very close to having enough room to do that safely. And we want to have those discussions and make sure that that can get vetted by the MOTI and engineers. So just a few fine tunings in that area on our public property side, and then on the MOT public property side really is kind of coming up with a better way. Have had some initial conversations with the opposite property with the Tourism Info Center. They get busy and get full as well. Did talk to staff about our intention to introduce paid parking and how their site is an integral and adjacent site to the beach access. And potentially they would like to watch our pay parking system unfold and see if that might be interest for their own business to incent turnover and to keep people moving in that area, free up space, and also potentially generate some revenues. So interesting first order discussions in that space right now, but I don't see any plan in our near-term future that would suggest that those spaces would be repatriated to public beach access use rather than staying as they are today, which would be for tourism center, info center use. South Chesterman Beach lot, fine tuning and configuring the parking in there to be organized, to have an angled outside ring and a herringbone configuration in the center, and sprucing up the pedestrian access points from the bathroom to the beach location and moving some stuff over and allocating some space to make sure that pedestrians with their boards and their gear and their wagons and their strollers and their people and their babies and everything like that can get across the road safely, rather than what they do today, which is all stand in the access driveway and just hope that cars and everybody's paying attention. So lots of improvements to be made in there. Maybe I'll stop after those 4 or 3 because I'm kind of getting on with details here, and I realize that I might lose some commentary. So I'll start there, or stop there, which is the South Chesterman Beach lot. I've done those 3 and maybe open up for some commentary, if that makes sense.
Councillor Challenger has her hand up.
My question is, are these listed in order of priority or are they at random?
Thanks, Councillor Challenger. These are listed essentially from south to north. So no priority, just moving basically up the peninsula. I'll probably get called out a couple of times on some of the little oddball things in there, but basically we started at Cox Maltby just as the first as you encounter as a visitor.
Okay, thanks. And to follow up, is there a priority or is that something that is still under development?
I would prioritize all of the improvements based on safety which doesn't have a specific location first. It's based on issue, essentially. So there might be one issue in one parking lot that's the top priority for all, and then another issue in another parking lot that's the second priority. And I would always go from health, safety, health and well-being, infrastructure damage, that kind of thing, and then moving down towards convenience. And that would be the rationale.
I see no more hands up.
Okay, Chesterman Lynn Roads. The big change there would, if in this system, is that those two roads would be effectively acting as beach access parking lots that would move towards a no overnight parking configuration, just like the rest of our beach parking lots. That way we can continue to enforce it with our third-party services, and we could clean up the way that those are managed when it comes to beach fires and maybe partying and that kind of thing on the beach. It would come with a loss of convenience, of course, to certain users. But I think for the most part, it happens kind of naturally anyway, except in a few pockets. And this would try to nudge a lot of that private parking back onto private property for tenants or for service providers or for other users. The other kind of big change we're proposing along these roads, which is to put in a delineated dashed or suitable white parking line along the pavement, along the asphalt, that if your tire was over it in towards the center line, you got a ticket. If your tire was on the good side, which is towards the ditch, you didn't get a ticket. This is aiming to directly improve the geometrical decisions of the parker next to a ditch, which is often not super easy because there might be a steep ditch that someone's worried about someone falling in when they open a door, which would arguably be a parking spot that we want to remove. But it really also tries to sort of set our sights on changing the behaviors with a bunch of users that don't really take a lot of care to make sure that they're as tight to the ditch as possible so that there's the most amount of room for other road users. As council knows, no sidewalks, no pedestrian amenities, no cycling amenities for most of these sections of the road, which means that dog walkers and pedestrians are all forced into the right of way. People's equipment and gear gets forced into the right of way. The tighter we can make the vehicles to the ditches, the better it is for the other users. I'll keep going. The North Chesterman Beach lot, I'll stop after this one.
We had one question from Councillor Anderson.
Okay, I'll stop there.
Not a question, maybe a suggestion. I don't know how to do it, but I'd like to be able to encourage, maybe with signage, people to change and to take their gear out and move it behind their vehicles on Lynn and Chesterman's. They often park and then can start to deal with their wetsuits, their gear, or just stand and talk with their doors open, blocking another 4 to 6 feet of laneway. And if there's any way we can encourage people to sort of, get your stuff out quickly, close your doors, and try to get behind your vehicles in the parking area, that would be great. I don't know how to do it though.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. I think part of the 4-hour maximum time was also intended to really reduce the amount. People could still pay that rate if they wanted to stay for hours and hours, but we're really hoping to disincentivize people that stay and kind of camp out of their vehicle on the side of the road, if they might be better suited to do that somewhere different. And it really is driving at that phenomena of which you speak, which is the equipment kind of overflow into the right of way. I think also with the third-party services in the app, we all have an opportunity to exchange information via the digital applications and that kind of thing that maybe is more impactful than more signage. But I think in some of those locations, we may actually need that parking etiquette or those rules enforced or sort of stressed via the right messaging and the right signage. So I think that's a really important part of the overall safety and management of these types of locations is the equipment management piece. And we're alive to that, and I'll take your comments forward. So on to North Chesterman Beach lot, again, moving to a one-way in and out scenario. Right now we have a one-way out on one side, but the other side's unrestricted. Some tidying up of the parking configuration and improved pedestrian sort of pathways with a couple of other recommendations like allocating the spot in front of the washrooms with the greatest access and and unobstructed access for the accessible parking stall. There's a couple little things in there, but overall, that parking lot is working in a pretty high functioning way, and we'll just look at improvements there. Another major change for us moving forward would be the introduction of parking along Osprey Lane and removing the planters that are the high profile planters that are along the right hand side of the road as you're driving north. And we had lots of discussions and very supportive reception from Mr. McDermott on this issue, who is really just keen to work with us to make these types of improvements. The big change here would not just be the introduction of angled parking, which is now parallel parking, kind of delineated by those planters. Which it would be is, as long as we have the right of way available, there's a stub of a pedestrian pathway that extends from Lynn along the corner to Osprey for about 80 meters or so, that I would seek to decommission so that we could actually push, even if it was temporarily, push angled parking in that zone so that we could safely get the vehicles farther off the right of way, and then actually put in a gravel pedestrian pathway, which is currently what we have at the edges of the North Chesterman lot that links on that side of the road into the North Chesterman beach access. The reason I feel like that's okay, and I would professionally almost never ever want to prioritize a parking above a pedestrian amenity, but in this case, there's a couple reasons why I feel like that's appropriate. One is it's a private road that's accessing a resort that is not, and that pedestrian pathway is actually truncated and just stops at the edge of the right of way. The second one is that the desire line is not there. It's on the other side of the road connecting to the beach access. We obviously have to be clear that we don't send them down a driveway, there's 2 driveways there for private residences, but I think this is a better use of the space, and it will also allow us to take the pressures off some of the other locations there with a little bit more dense parking in this location, which is right adjacent to the access, the main beach access. Not everybody's convinced. And my discussions with some of the residents and some of the stakeholders, and like I've said to them, and I'll maybe say here, is I would suggest parking is infinitely temporary. With a bit of a financial and resource hit to implement or to change, we can really change the types of operations and the configuration with paint and signage, in most cases at a reasonable resource hit. So I would maybe allay some of council's concerns in any of these issues that I'm sort of proposing, is that if it's not working, or if patterns change, which they can often do, we can step in and adjust. So maybe I'll stop there, which is the North Chesterman Beach lot in the Osprey Lane, and I'll just see if there's comments.
I see none.
Okay, I'll keep going. Lynn Road west of Howard, another interesting set of perspectives on this one. What I'm proposing is that for a certain amount of Lynn Road west of the speed table, so kind of on the hill that comes down, where the geometries will allow, which is probably about 8 meters up the hill towards the highway from the stop sign along the pedestrian path, and I call it a pedestrian path and not a muck because it's not wide enough to be a muck, but and I'll talk about that in a sec. What I'm recommending is I'm recommending that we allow parking there with that same white delineated parking barrier line along the edge of the vehicle lanes. And the reason I'm happy to put parking in a couple of spots in there is because there's actually more room there than there is in much of the Lynn Road and Chesterman Road sections. Right now, if you're leaving the North Chesterman lot and driving to the highway along Lynn on the most expeditious route, which is sort of to the north or northeast, what you do is you leave a very congested parking zone with vehicles sort of rammed into that beach side of the ditch line. And then you automatically kind of like sort of arrive at this wide right of way that has a sidewalk on the one side, and there's concrete bollards way up there. And there's more room and more width than anywhere along Lynn and Chesterman, and people drive fast there. So when I suggest to people that I want to put parking there, the first response I often get is people drive too fast. You can't put parking in, like Councillor Anderson said, have people emptying their things out into the right of way. But people drive as fast as they are comfortable. And if we squeeze in a couple of these locations, it's not necessarily that we will just add risks. We will actually slow people down and reduce the risks. So my rationale, and this is the conversations I've had with some of the transportation consultants, is that do we have enough room to allow safe parking along this side? And how would we enforce that to make sure that a wheel wasn't over top of the sidewalk that runs along that section of Lynn, or that they weren't too far into the right of way, which creates other issues and hazards? And the response that I got back was, you have enough room to do this safely, and you should paint and delineate so that people don't have their wheels over the edge. And if they do, they should get a ticket. So again, what I'm recommending here is that for a certain amount of spots, which would be west again of that speed table, I don't necessarily want to allocate resources to cut those last 3 or so concrete bollards out, but I think there's enough room in there that we could safely protect and safeguard without intruding on top of the pedestrian path and still have vehicles far enough off the road. The challenge here, I think, and I would agree with stakeholder and residents along this area, is that people will tend to empty their stuff into the pedestrian pathway. And that has to be, again, with Councillor Anderson's sort of conversation, instead of the right of way, in this case, they'll empty into the lowest risk side of the room that they have. I think in the long term, when we redesign Lynn Road, we're gonna have to be very careful with this section and choose to make it a very wide pedestrian and cycling pathway and just allocate all that space for cyclists and pedestrians. Or we're gonna wrestle with this boulevard / sidewalk scenario where we may take parking off our way. I think there's gonna be a rich sort of discussion with council and residents about how we should design the future road there. But for now, what I'm proposing is that we allocate parking in there where we have the geometry to do so safely, and that we monitor quite closely, understanding that there are some risks and compromises with this model as we go. Part of that would also suggest that cyclists wouldn't necessarily be welcome to ride on an amenity that is busy enough with pedestrians, that those conflicts should be avoided. And we should actually incentivize the cyclists to be in the road like they are on the rest of Lynn and Chesterman. And if we have speeds down below 30, then we actually should be able to manage those things safely. So that's a lot. So I think I should probably be quiet for a second there, and I'll open up for some questions.
I see none.
Okay.
Oh, wait, maybe. I don't know. Councillor Anderson kind of has.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you heard any concerns about speeding on Lynn and Chesterman's. I sort of see it a little bit when people post signs of their own about how fast to drive, and if some of those other things will go along with the parking plan, maybe posting the speed limit more often. Also on Highway 4, at one time there was discussion about that the ministry wanted to lower the speed limit in the 70 zone about from Cox Bay all the way into town. And maybe if there's going to be more parking along Highway 4, the speed limit might be changed and also posted more often along the highway.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. I have those same kind of concerns, and those are live discussions right now with MOTI on those elements that you just said. So they've committed to coming out this summer and doing counts on speeds and numbers and incidents in the busy period of the summertime to see the real world conditions that we often sort of struggle with. So they've committed to that. We've also talked about what they find during that counts will dictate what they think is an appropriate set of changes in that area. So that's good news that they're coming a little bit. I know we all want a little bit more, and I'll do my best working with Ms. Vermont on managing those issues with Highways as partners. And I believe that we need to continually assess these types of things of speeds and traffic calming, and also as we start introducing new crosswalks like the one that's going in at South Chesterman currently, which we advocated for, and they've been very supportive of. Future crosswalk locations potentially at Cox Bay 1431 Long Beach Lodge access driveway would potentially trip them into a whole review of speeds in there. We also have those kind of concerns at the Lift to Surf part of town, where we have a very, very busy set of intersections and a lot of road users intermingling in that area in the summertime, and potentially an argument for speed changes or monitoring. As far as Lynn Road, you asked me what we're thinking about as far as speed. I'm a resident of Lynn Road, and I spend I'm a pedestrian, I'm a cyclist, and I'm a motorist. I probably should have said that at the beginning, but I use all modes on all town roads. And my experience with Lynn Road thus far is that speeding happens most often on Lynn Road when it's the emptiest, and when there's more parking users and it's very congested, people go slow. It's less convenient because convenient and speed are very closely related. But we see in many cases that people slow down because they're squeezed, which is consistent, I think, in all jurisdictions. What we do see, though, is that loss of convenience where there might be the impatient speeder, which gets frustrated because they had to wait and then they kind of accelerate very significantly or cause some other issues. So that does happen. And then I think there's probably some people might be very comfortable to drive in other instances and still go too fast for the other road users' liking. I hadn't said it yet, but yellow lines painted along the center line give the driver or the user of the right-of-way a sense of entitlement to which part of the road they're on. We shouldn't have yellow lines. That's in many areas in residential streets in our community. If we want to really drive hard, at slower is better, because we want people to not necessarily have a right to that road space and to be in a position where they have to contest that they're sharing it with other users. They have to assess the risks. They have to assess that there's not a rite of passage, literally, and they go slower. So I think the lack of a yellow line should be a practice that we continue to subscribe to in some of these locations to slow people down. We also don't have traffic calming on the, I think it's one of our lift stations. I think it's Sauna House, I think is a common name for that access point on Lynn, all the way to Middle Chesterman and around the corner. There is not a speed table there similar to the poly ones that have been implemented some years ago. So I think some new traffic calming should be a real important consideration for us along different sections of Lynn. And the design of Lynn and Chesterman roads as we go forward in the future should really take into consideration this slow speed, mixed all types of users, getting pedestrian amenities put in there, that kind of thing, so that we can get the safety standards to go up and the qualities to go up. So I think to answer your question, I think speed can be an issue. I want people to go slow. I want people to feel constrained as they're driving because they go slower. I don't want necessarily everybody's soft top surfboard to be in the middle of the right of way, because that creates other issues like frustration and those types of aggressive behaviors and also other safety issues. But I think we want to be squeezed. We want to be slow.
Councillor Steer had his hand up.
Yeah, just quickly regarding the speed reduction from Maltby Road coming into South Chesterman and beyond. This is something, and having been involved in the crosswalk there, these are discussions that have been going on for several years, and I'm happy to hear, Mr. Work, that these conversations have been accelerated, because I was told very clearly that they had looked into the issue of speed reduction between Maltby and coming in, and that it was a no-go. So thank you for continuing those conversations, and I appreciate it.
There's no other questions.
Okay. Tonquin Park Road, delineated private access only spot, and the pedestrian pathway along the side. So I do have a slide with a picture on it, and this one maybe I'll have to explain a little bit. So right now when you arrive, if you're an unfamiliar user to Tonquin Park Road, you would potentially crest the hill on your way down to the beach access, thinking that you were on a longer country road that wasn't necessarily a dead end. And you might not understand exactly where the beach access is and where driveway goes this way. Is that my beach access, or is it this trail, or whatever? So it's not clearly delineated. It's not clearly signed in some respects. And the parking amenities that are in the pavement or the asphalt are also wearing and tearing and need some tidying up. So what we're recommending here, and talking with a couple of the local residents, is that there's a gravel kind of right of way that runs down the left-hand side of the street, which is just that section after the organized parking that connects to the toilet and the beach access pathway. What we're recommending here is just actually delineating that really, really clearly, so that a first-time user gets there and they know this left-hand curve is my pedestrian pathway straight to the beach, and everything else I should just stay clear of. And there's a few other improvements that we want to make down there. There's some real vehicle size constraints with turnaround and issues in there. We had the fire chief down and talking about minimum geometries for turnarounds and that kind of thing. But I think we can make quite a few improvements with the introduction of just paid parking by itself, but also making sure that the setup is configured in a very user-friendly, intuitive manner, and that it's signed properly, and that we should look at some vehicle restrictions on size to make sure we don't get into those instances, which are not that uncommon, where we see a very, very large vehicle over 20 feet long hanging off of a parking spot into the middle of the road where no one else can safely pass. So it's a special zone, of course, and but it's very constrained and very small. And we would be, I think, smartest to bump a lot of the users up to the community hall where they've got more room for larger vehicles and that kind of thing. And also make sure that we have a healthy turnover at Tonquin Park Road via the paid parking, so that we have users that can access it and not necessarily abuse it. So Tonquin Park Road, no real departure from how it's used, except for the paid parking introduction. Okay, Gibson Road. Gibson is really close to Campbell Street and really underutilized parking, and it can house a lot more longer stay and RV. So I think the most important use of, or the highest and best use of that amenity when it comes to parking is to incentivize more RVs and larger vehicles to use that zone, as well as the daytime employees that support all of the business and all of the economy down along Campbell and the rest of the village, but let them park a little bit less restricted or unrestricted up at Gibson's. So we free up Gibson's we free up Campbell for the more frequent turnover, the shorter stay stuff. So this is sort of an incentive program, but really a designation and a signage kind of configuration to incent or to attract the RV user onto Gibson and keep them out of circulating in the downtown, which is often the case, or parking in very tight spots in the downtown or along the skate park, that kind of thing. 4th and Gibson is sort of an extension of that zone. So if I did keep on going, and by all means, please interrupt as required. But 4th and Gibson is the shared space with the school. We see a lot of trailers and vehicles that are abandoned there. We have not physically delineated the boundary of our property along that zone, which allows very long vehicles to be discarded in that area, beats up the drainage and stuff like that. We do have some projects in there to improve the drainage this year, so we will be doing work in there, which will kind of eke some people out of that right away. But I think we can work with the school, continue to work with the school, and fix a lot of that stuff by physical delineations, restrictions, signage, and clear "do not abandon your trailer" instructions. Mayor?
I believe Councillor Steer had a question or comment on the previous section.
Yeah, it does tie in with the trailer parking, but on Gibson Road and in the slide here, it talks about long stay parking designation. Could you define what long stay would refer to?
Sure, through the mayor. I think what I'm talking about here is beyond 4 hours, but not necessarily days or weeks. I think I think you've definitely illustrated that can be misinterpreted. The intent here was that these are sort of day-long parkers. That's what the intent is.
Thank you.
Councillor Thick has her hand up. Mr. Work.
Councillor Thick.
Yeah, thank you. And just further to that, the comment by Councillor Steer, I personally would question, the encouragement of more RVs and long stay parking right outside an elementary school. I just have some problems with that kind of encouragement. I don't know where else you'd put them. The other thing is with regard to 4th and Gibson's and all the trailers that are there. Again, the reason that they're there is because of the proximity to the Harbor Authority at 4th Street, and there's no facility there where a local person with a small boat can leave their trailer. So it's kind of like the proximity of that is what is allowing, and that's what's happened. That's what's been allowed to happen, but it also is compounded by the fact that there is nothing at 4th Street where you can leave a trailer. So that's just another. So those two issues with regards to Gibson Road and the RVs and the lack of opportunity for people to leave their trailers when they're going for a day or weekend boat trip. Thank you.
Through the mayor, I'd offer a couple of considerations to add to that. We've had some talks with the school leadership team about the use of those areas for mainly to service peak season summertime densities. The school is shut for much of the peak season, but not of course not for any visit of an RV. The school has also voiced its interest in potentially using their surface lot at the top of the school towards First as a parking amenity for public use, which would have to be sort of cleanly administered in partnership with us. So I think that there would be the highest amount of demand would obviously coincide with when the school was closed, if there was concerns about the mixing of those two operations at the same time. But of course, those have to be carefully considered. The current way that there's seasonal signs for restrictions that are or June to September and those types of kind of signs that are around currently allow the RV parking in some of those zones today. And we see it very common really on 3rd Street along the school frontage and then all the way down Gibson for some of the larger vehicles, vans, that kind of thing. The other consideration I'd wish to draw council's attention to is that an unhooked trailer without its own braking system contravenes the Motor Vehicle Act. Our bylaw clearly stipulates that it's illegal and contravenes our bylaws to have an unhooked trailer parked in the right-of-way, which could be a safety concern if it ever came into contact with another vehicle. It can become a projectile. It's often used without a license or left there without a license plate and unregistered. So there's all kinds of issues and concerns with those types of pieces of equipment or vehicles left unattended to, some of which are left for several weeks without being moved. So I agree completely with Councillor Thick's indication that there's no attractive alternative for some of these vehicles to be stowed. That's highlighted in the report and as well on a future slide. And I think that for the long term, we really have to find other alternatives for these types of demand usages. Industrial Way could potentially house many of those trailers if there was a convenient, cost-effective way to do so and then transition back to the waterfront to go do your recreating. I know that some of those business models maybe haven't been nudged into implementation because the right policies weren't in place. And I think it's our policies or our rules or regulations will play important set of kind of nudges or incentivizations for those types of things to come to be. I would just ask council to consider what is the highest and best use of the land around the school for the summertime. Is it to house unhooked trailers? Is it to allow kids to play in that area? Is it to allow other types of parking? Is it to house a sidewalk in the future and a boulevard and to continue to sort of improve those amenities and incent people to come and use the park and the ball fields and that kind of thing? So I think that I guess I would of course agree that this is a problem that we need to get our heads wrapped around and figure out how to solve. And we also want to make sure that part of that problem is finding a way that people can conveniently get their boat in the water and go about their recreating and make sure that their stuff is safe and secure when they get home. So I think it's an interesting one. The boat trailer phenomena is definitely wasn't something that I was dealing with a lot in Victoria. I had maybe some other unique situations that we wouldn't see here, but I definitely understand the demand.
I believe Councillor Steer did have his hand up at the mention of boat trailers, is my guess.
No, it's okay. I've been working on this one for a long time, and it's something I can have an offline conversation with Mr. Work on.
Perfect. Seeing no more hands up.
All right. Municipal hall parking lots. This would be a proposed change, which again is subject to some debate about allocating a dense configuration to house smaller passenger vehicles in the municipal hall lots, incentivizing them to be more like a day-long parker, the longer stay, not like a 20, 30 minute, an hour one, but staying for a little bit longer and having rates that attract them for such things. And then using those to the highest and best use for people that are visiting the community on a daily basis in the downtown core. Industrial Way, if I skip across to that one, and then of course I'm almost done this slide, but the big two changes here would be putting some physical barriers to prevent parking on the back side of sidewalk. So we have the sidewalk along the south side of Industrial Way for the first 100 meters or so. What we see is in the busy times of the year, we don't see it much over the winter, but what we've seen in my experience so far is that when the brewery is very busy, a lot of spillover parking, and that the vehicles mount the curb, which is a mountable, semi-mountable curb, across the sidewalk and park in the gravel. That's deteriorating the natural vegetation, but it's also putting vehicles on top of a sidewalk, which I would never really want to see happen. So I would be recommending putting rocks or some sort of physical barriers that are aesthetically reasonable in there, and then pushing that parking to the street parking or the edges of the gravel where there is no sidewalk, and leaving that sidewalk unimpeded and unobstructed by vehicles. The second one, which is where I'll stop talking right after I say it out loud, is the staff recommendation, which not all staff would probably agree with, but is to have a trial of overnight pay parking at the section of Industrial Way just behind me here, which is the section basically from the return at sea container down towards where the wetland is, the section right in front of Public Works yard, on a trial basis for overnight pay parking. Every morning in the summer, Bylaws is here knocking on windows, asking vehicles to leave and their campers to leave, and giving tickets or warnings. And in my mind, like I said before, is we have to do our best where reasonable to provide attractive alternatives for the things that are already occurring, for the things that we believe will continue to occur, and for the things that we also worry that they'll move to other areas which are less favorable. And I think those three things are really what suggests to me that it's smart to say, let's charge something for an overnight parking. Let's do it only on a very restricted number of spaces. Let's use those revenues to put a porta potty there so we have people going to the bathroom in the bathroom rather than the ditch. And let's see if that actually takes the heat and pressure off some other people for some other locations. Do I think that the word will get out of the blog saying that there's 7 more spots that you could pay for in Victoria, or in Tofino, excuse me, overnight parking, 7 more vans just come this way? I don't necessarily think so. So that's my rationale for why I believe that might be a supportable trial for council to consider, and I'll stop talking then.
I have a comment on that, Mr. Work. Is I like the idea, and I'm supportive of it for that trial. So that's my 2 bits. And I believe somebody else, Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Law. Mr. Worker, just an idea, what's the approximate number of sites that we'd be looking at that location?
Thanks, through the mayor. Thanks, Councillor Steer. I think we're about a dozen. I haven't measured it specifically, but we would require, we would be the ones who would paint the stalls there and make sure that there was actually stalls and that was signed appropriately. So it is a bit of a simple configuration exercise, actually, because it's a dead end and it's on the one side, and there's a, we can boundary it quite well. So I think it'd be about a dozen.
Thank you.
I believe Councillor Thick has her hand up.
Yeah, I would be supportive of a 1-season trial with the proviso that perhaps there was a limited number of nights, maybe it's only 1 or 2 nights, just to capture those people that maybe drove into town and didn't have something booked. And also that you cannot book them. I think it would be important that, it's not something that we're providing for a period of time. It's just a sort of an emergency thing. And yeah, so I like that idea. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Thick. The intent of staff was to have a first come, first serve scenario. There are some parking systems out there in the municipal world that include a reservation level of service. Whether we want to do that in the future for any of our beach lots, I think would be subject to our learning and our growth in the paid parking arena. But I do appreciate the comment about limiting the nights, which I hadn't thought of yet. So I'll definitely take that forward.
And Councillor Anderson.
I'm not sure how much demand for parking there is at the trailhead for the connector trail off of Industrial Way there, next to the recycling yard. There's certainly some people want to park there to enter into the Tonquin Trail system. I'm wondering if there's any thought about either improvements or pay parking for that area. I could see as we make pay parking at the other trailheads, and it may bring more people to that end of the trail for the free parking. So I don't know if you can answer that right now, but throw that in the mix anyway.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. I know Chief Baker probably has a little bit more discrete information about the type of turnover ticketing and issues down at that park, because I know the bylaw officers frequent that area on wake ups and in the morning, that kind of thing. We thought about that zone as probably that next phase 2022 of parking configurations and changes, and would monitor. Based on what I know today, I'd recommend we monitor that in 2021 and look at how the patterns change with the pay parking versus other access points that are less costly, and then see how it goes. But I take the point that should be a part of our future reviews and discussions, and made notes.
I see no more questions. I do have a comment. You said you're finished the slide, Mr. Work, but there's residential neighborhoods permit only parking restrictions. Is that, maybe I missed that. Did you?
Sorry, Mayor Law. Yeah, I just meant that I was going to stop after that bullet item, but I do have those. I do have those last two for sure.
Okay, great. I see no more hands. I see no more hands up.
Okay, so the last two, which there's also individual pages in the appendix or sections that treat some of these areas. There's, and I actually missed the Campbell Street various locations, so I'll go back to that third one as well. We've got a lot of locations in the community that we want to improve parking. We also want to avoid this unintended consequence where we change a parking pattern in one spot and we impose an unintended consequence somewhere else. So I think as we move forward, we'll have to really be careful about some of these zones. Councillor McMaster mentioned last time we talked about parking about Howard Street. What was the role of Howard on, sorry if it's a road, not a street. I haven't got all those committed to memory yet, but Howard often plays an overflow role in parking for North Chesterman beach access, especially because at the end there's that pathway through the dune network. I think all of these locations we have to look at what kind of parking improvements we should make that are just configuration based stuff, and then how we actually restrict, constrain, or manage those in the future as we start to get more experience with pay parking. So some of my comments in the pages talk about just making some configuration improvements at various locations, residential neighborhoods, and some of them also flag certain residential neighborhoods that they would require in the future in 2022 a permit to park overnight on the street in a residential only neighborhood. And if you're staying in a vacation rental, that's part of your booking process where you buy a temporary residential neighborhood parking permit. But you wouldn't be able to, if you were van dwelling and you were going there, it'd be very, very clearly a zone that you couldn't park without the right paid permit access. The Campbell Street various locations, one thing I did want to mention, and I'm talking with MOTI about, and I would wish to have a little bit of oversight and guidance from council, is that there's 2 sections or 3 sections of Campbell Street on the fringes of town, near sort of south of 4th Street, that have a shoulder along the west side of the road that is frequently used for parking, some of which says no parking with MOTI right of way, some of which says 2 hour, that kind of thing. So if I'm specifically talking about Nielsen to Lone Cone and Lone Cone to Gateway Sidewalk, and what I've asked MOTI and what I've talked about with planning and with public spaces a little bit is, can we do a temporary flexible bollard system that are connected to the gravel or the soil, and make a temporary sidewalk along that gravel shoulder, take all the parking off of there, and really privilege pedestrian access that links the Gateway Sidewalk to Lone Cone sidewalks, and then Surf Sister to Nielsen. And what that does is it takes those 2 residential streets and links them to the crosswalk at Gibson, and gets you either to the school or to the MUP in a dedicated set of right of way. So what I'm saying, temporary sidewalk, is that proposal there. And if I was to go forward with some discussions, I have some budget to improve the delineation of pedestrian in the MUP. I'm pricing out all the materials that are needed, and I wanted to actually look hard at this as a trial and potentially see if this could be a very strong step towards formal pedestrian side curb and gutter in there. So I would just offer that up for council's consideration or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Work. I'm actually quite in favor of that. The kids from both of those streets do walk to school there all the time, and often if there's cars or RVs or something parked there, then it's onto the road or into the ditch. I would have concern about parking. I know that Long Beach Surf Shop has a lot of business parking parked between Neil and Lone Cone, and I think if you took that right away without offering any other alternative parking, either on beside the MUP in that sort of no man's land there or something, then it would cause some issues, and I think it would end up people would be parking there anyway, which would be very difficult. So.
Thanks, Mayor Law. If I could comment just quickly on those comments before everybody else chimes in. There's 2-hour parking regulated there from the MOTI right of way. That's on the west side of the highway, that location that fronts the opposite side of the road from TRM. That a lot of employees do park there. I've had talks with the business owners. And we understand that there's those demands, and that would not necessarily be the highest and best use of that particular real estate. We've also had residents there that put out cones and different warning lights, essentially, for the lefts and right turns in and out of those properties, as well as the blind spots or the sightline obstructions from those vehicles. In some cases, I think we can allocate some of the space on private property to better serve those users. The other part of it, which I think is probably the most important part, is that currently with April Fremont and myself, working with a consultant team, and also keeping the Tofino Resort Marina in the loop, and talking and having to have more talks with both, and the adjacent business owner, Long Beach Surf Shop, is really trying to figure out getting the right future design for that whole area from Olson to the Long Beach Surf Shop kind of northerly kind of corner. That, after the Cox Bay zone outside of 1431 beach access, is the second most severe and significant safety risk that we carry right now on the highway. And we've been having lots of talks and walk the sites with the MOTI reps and talking about interventions and temporary interventions, and then moving towards much more permanent, elegant solution in there by redesigning that whole set of right-of-way. And you call it the no man's land. And the reason I like that is because no one, even the most kind of frequent user, understands how that's supposed to function in there. There's yellow wheel stops hanging. There's this vast amount of shoulder right of way. There's the MUP, and the pavement's all sort of very poorly conditioned. There's there's a very significant squeeze in all kinds of driveways and unloading conditions and all stuff. I think I have a picture on one of the next couple slides that shows sort of the interventions maybe we don't want to see happen, which is where employees of the surf shop start doing traffic control untrained, putting pylons or different control devices in the right of way, which doesn't necessarily have MOTI approvals, and taking on liabilities and risks. And it's a bit of a gong show, and we need to get it right. So we are progressing forward with a design that we will bring back to council and the public for commentary. We'll work with the adjacent landowners on that. We will make interventions this summer in the delineation of the MUP and the safety zones, and we will work with the Long Beach Surf Shop to try to figure out how can we do this safely this year and then onwards. And we'll work with MOTI on that stuff. But the other side of the street plays a pretty important role too to how pedestrians and vehicles and employees move in and around that zone. So this little delineation exercise, it's actually kind of a simple, maybe a quick win. And I take your point that those vehicles still likely got to go somewhere. So where are they going to go, and how are we going to free up that right away, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a big thumbs up to the ideas around the pedestrianism there. I think pedestrians being the least protected of all mobility, people using the transport system should take precedent over vehicle use. Just another comment around the Long Beach Surf Shop property. that property was originally zoned as office space, and it had designated parking included in the plan at the time it was rezoned to that. It's since changed use a couple of times, and the demands on parking have changed, and the parking that's actually in place on that property is underutilized. I think it's actually under the building and down the hill. So I think that, I'm not sure if staff is aware of that or new council members, but the parking that they were obliged to put in when they rezoned should be taken into consideration when considering that property.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, that has been subject to some initial dialogue, but I think is going to be more and more important as we move through some of the interim changes.
I see no more hands, Mr. Work.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Law. The next slide, which is that many slides before I just paste the verbatim recommendations, and I appreciate council's patience and the sort of length of our discussion here. So maybe I'll be a little bit more brief on this next one here. But what the intention of this slide is to highlight some of those areas that are going to be maybe the most challenging to manage when it comes to changing parking and sort of redefining how parking works in the community. And I've highlighted these ones because I believe that they're important for us to at least consider, important opportunities for us to dialogue if we have a shared approach or a shared understanding or otherwise. Maybe ask me questions about certain things, and also probably a source of a lot of future dialogue engagement with different stakeholders on these issues. So I think when it comes to change management, I often want to fall back to our values or our principles. And I think parking tests that, and transportation management tests that in interesting ways. So what I've done here is I've highlighted just the bullets, titles of what is on page 9 and 10, I think, or 8, 9, and 10 of the report. And what I mean to do here is stimulate a bit of discussion or debate if there is any direction that you'd like to give staff in these areas. But I guess I'll go through them quickly, and then maybe I'll just go through them once about what they mean, and then I'll allow some, I'll stop and provide that time for discussion. So there's a quote that I put on the back end of a slide, which was first told to me from a transportation planner, which said, which is this quote right here: many people cannot get what they want if everyone gets what they need. And there's a tension here between wants and needs when it comes to parking and the use of public space that the frequent user has become entitled to. Convenience is at the heart of the parking discussion, and taking convenience away is actually a loss, is experienced as a loss, I think, and for most of us, and also has its own very unique and personal ramifications for the user. But I think I think it's my job it's my duty and responsibility to recommend and to put into action things that pose the potential to deliver the highest community good. And in some cases, there's high competition for this space, and we have to make a decision of how people access it. Is it open access with no regulation or controls or management schemes? Is it public access with management schemes like pay parking? Are we enforcing the rules? That kind of thing. The other one, so that sort of takes the first two. We do have, like Councillor Stick's comments before, I think we really have to decide on how we're going to manage boat and trailer parking, both in terms of our existing bylaw, enforcement, consistency, but also in finding other solutions and alternatives that hopefully can deliver convenience to the users in a way that's not so different from today's kind of ad hoc approach. Are we happy to manage daytime RV parking away from the municipal hall surface lots and put it up onto some of these locations like Gibson or even the community hall surface gravel lots? Are we okay at restricting overnight parking on Lynn and Chesterman and Osprey? Are we committed to changing and renewing our bylaw and enforcing those commitments, and does staff have the coverage to come up against those tensions between wants and needs? Are we, how do we want as a local government to allocate funds that are generated from the parking system? And then there's a recommendation to address this and some of these other comments. I would advocate strongly for the introduction of a temporary street user permit, which would anybody from chopping a tree down that has to park their tree arborist in public right of way, put a sea container for a reno, or drive their forklift or their backhoe on our property while they work on their property in order to maintain appropriate safety standards and consistency, like many or if not most larger municipalities do today. Do we want to charge parking seasonally or vary the rate seasonally? Do we agree and understand that the administrative process potentially, in order to make that efficient, comes at sacrifices of uniqueness and case-by-case administration? And how does council wish for the staff to engage, and what authorities do you wish us to have when it comes to making these decisions on a daily basis? If I want to change a sign or change the beach access to a one-way in, one-way out, would council like to be engaged on each of those, or does staff have the freedom to make certain decisions in the field operationally, and where does council see those boundaries? So that's essentially what this set of bullets have intend to address. Again, these are framed as a set of issues, but each one of those we could probably discuss for many hours at a time. So I know that that's maybe difficult to come to resolution or decisions here. And I think some of the recommendations aim to make that today's decision discrete, even if some of those remain under debate. That's all for that. And I'll respond to any questions, of course.
Just one, Mr. Work. This is an overview of the slides to come.
This is an encapsulation, I think, of where staff and council will be challenged with respect to the introduction of changes in the parking space, and an offering basically for council to consider, are we aligned? How do we want to address these types of things? Some of which manifest as discrete recommendations on a future slide, some of which are kind of like the woolly undertones that kind of almost are a factor in almost all of our decisions moving forward. So it's probably a hard one to navigate. The way that I said it's maybe not as clear as I'd hope, but it's really, where's council at with this stuff?
I was just sorry to clarify there, Mr. Work. I was just wondering if you wanted us to comment on these issues right now, or giving us a chance to, or giving council a chance to comment on these issues as they come up in the rest of your presentation.
I think that's a wonderful question, because I think my open-endedness probably makes for a totally inefficient discussion. So I would suggest that the recommendations do drive as verbatim recommendations from the report quite pointedly at some of those things. And maybe I would ask for council to reflect on these issues and then as we reach the bylaw as a recommended set of changes, or as we start to navigate the introduction of these parking systems, that we continue to come back to some of these issues as sort of the core of parking management considerations, and use just that as a tool to help us navigate those discussions. So before I get to that recommendation, my second last slide of this, and I do have those background slides if you need them by location, but my second to last slide really just says that we continue to engage and plan for our sessions with those users that are most affected by these proposed set of changes first, which has a list there of how we want to step through that. And then we've also working with corporate services to develop a specific project communications plan, which will put the information in the hands of stakeholders via a number of different channels that are in the report, that include mail outs, posters, site-specific locations, and then also meetings and discussions, pamphlets and rack cards for Tourism Tofino resorts and all that kind of thing. So we are getting our heads wrapped around exactly what's required for us to make sure that the word is out there and the information is clear and concise for the different user communities, and to continue to engage those user communities in a meaningful way, albeit kind of with agility as we move forward. Any questions on that slide? That's page 10 in the report.
Yeah, I do have a comment in terms of the communication plan moving forward. And I know we've engaged the services now of a communications employee here, but I'm curious, as a huge an issue as this is, and the engagement, I know that you've been talking to specific user groups or stakeholders, as we refer to them often, and have been engaged in that way. With the general public, I know there was initial support from many in the public about the direction and a sort of a green light that we need to, the status quo isn't working, and that in this case, a paid parking or a parking management strategy is critical for the community. I'm wondering within this communication plan to continue that dialogue with the community and what format that might take. Of course, now with the Zoom world, I'm not a communications expert, but I do think that it will be critical to engage the larger public on this issue, and in what format I'm not sure, but not just those specific user groups that do have an important voice, but the larger community in general, I think, needs to be involved in this.
Thanks, Councillor Steer. Through the mayor, I think the Talk Tofino portal is probably going to be a pretty important channel for general communications to any public sort of interested party, as well as some of the posters and the things that are in those heavily utilized areas, whether that's co-op or post office lineups and that kind of thing. And then there'll be some mail outs that will go with some of the normal correspondence. And then that will be peppered with a number of series of discussions that almost anybody could just kind of pop into, whether that's the general residential discussion, the general business, that kind of thing. So the intent is to provide enough of a tapestry that really does get to the different pockets of the district to make sure that those responses, feedback, inputs ferreted out. And yeah, I think we would be successful if we did reach the largest amount of audiences for those who weren't necessarily planning to engage, but found themselves compelled to because they either liked or didn't like what they saw.
Thank you.
Councillor Thick.
Thank you. Thank you for this report so much, and the details with both the presentation and the report. And I'm right now just struggling a little bit with how high level you're looking for us at the moment. Like for myself, I'm very in support of all of the recommendations, and I think everything that you've brought up are really good points and really well needed. So then from us at this point in time, because I agree with you, we could spend hours and hours getting into the details and the points. So are you looking more for support in moving in this direction, things that we might be concerned about, or getting more into priorities and stuff? Because I'm assuming from this point, you'll take it, there'll be more reports, there'll be community engagement, and it will come back. So I guess the high levelness of this is what I'm asking.
Through the mayor, thanks, Councillor Chalmers. I think if I've said something that's a complete at odds with council, where council would like to see me move forward and progress this project, I would of course be very interested in learning that. If council wishes to impart some things to look out for, words of wisdom, considerations to make clear in my mind, like have in my back pocket as I move forward, which would also be great. And also if there's something that I feel council felt that I've missed or that I haven't, to make sure that I have on my radar, to make sure that I actually do a little bit of a course correction, that would be wonderful. I may ask if the CAO has anything to add as far as that sort of pitch perfect kind of engagement response here as the workshop, like we've all said, it could go to 5 millimeters of altitude or 35,000 feet. And I would actually, I'll feverishly write down everything that happens between those two levels of altitude. And but I do understand that as council, it might be good to have a kind of a nudge or a steer in a certain way, so that the time is used efficiently and people feel like their expectations are being met, that kind of thing. So I'm happy with everything you can give me, and if I'm suggesting you're doing something that you don't want me to do, please let's talk about that.
Mr. McPherson, I see you have your mute off, and I do have a comment that I'd like to make.
Right, I think that captured it pretty well. We're looking for, let us know if we're headed in a really wrong direction here. We will be back to council to talk about things like parking rates and durations and so on, and discuss a little bit more like what this looks like on the ground. So I think at this point we're below 30,000 feet. We're probably at 10,000 feet where it's, a parachute is still available to us. But looking to get comments that with the understanding from council that we're going to be working pretty feverishly over the next month to move this forward.
I do have a comment, but I believe Councillor Thick was first.
Yeah, thank you. Something that hasn't been mentioned that perhaps came up in discussions before I came onto council is the shuttle running in 2021? I haven't got a clear answer for that yet. That would impact some of my ideas and decisions, I think.
Yeah, actually, we did last week at Committee of the Whole advise council that shuttle will be running.
Okay.
We don't know the schedule at this point, but we're looking at an all-day service with likely enhancements to augment peak loading.
Okay, good. Sorry, I must have missed that. So I do remember now that you're saying that. Thank you. And further to Councillor McMaster's comments earlier about Howard Road, I think too that same notion needs to be applied to all adjacent roads to congested beach accesses. For example, at Tonquin Park, I know that we are going to try to put people up at the community hall where I understand there would be free parking. That's the notion. But for example, it's happened already many summers in a row that people go to Arnett. If you can avoid paying some money, you just go and park on Arnett. And then that again just moves the problem along. So just thinking about that whole adjacent road idea as we go through the list. As far as RVs go, I'm not in favor of encouraging more RVs in our town center. I've said that over many years, and I think it's something that we need to think long and hard about. If we have the shuttle, then I think we have a way for people to come in. We have a great MUP. I know that doesn't accommodate young families very well, but I think we really need to think more seriously about this RV question. And I guess just lastly, for today, that if we're talking about the money that might be raised, because this is an economic issue as well, I think we'd get a lot more buy-in from our community and from the users of the system if we actually targeted those funds to a specific community amenity that we thought was important. And I would put a vote in for recreation or the library. So I'm just suggesting that if we make it known that we intend to use those funds, I know that we have to pick up garbage and maybe a certain percentage goes towards those, actually getting the amenity, getting the everything ready for it to be a better parking lot. But I'm also suggesting that we need to be thinking long-term, what could we, what's in it for the community resident to, for further compliance. And I would suggest that we need to think about something in the area of recreation. So just my 2 cents for now. Thank you.
Great. I believe I've got a comment, and I believe it's Councillor Steer, Councillor McMaster, and then somebody else. Oh, it just changed completely. And then Councillor Anderson. The screen changed. Anyway. My comment actually really echoes Councillor Thick's comments on allocating funds, and I understand that the desire presented is to allocate funds to road improvements, etc., infrastructure like that. But I do concur that at least, if not all of it, but a certain portion, I would believe going to a community amenity would do well to move this along for our residents. That's my one comment, very high level. And then I believe, who was next? Councillor Steer, then Councillor McMaster, then Councillor Anderson.
Great, thank you, Mayor Law. Yeah, just in the I think the phased approach, moving the high density beach areas, starting with that, because my concern from a public works and infrastructure standpoint is the workload that's associated with this, and just thinking about this tires me, and I just can't imagine the amount that's being asked of you even in this initial phase, and how you be able on your work plan is your work plan, but it seems a tremendous amount to be able to get forward. So I do appreciate the phased approach. But with that being said, I do have concerns around the workload and the ability to move all of this forward at such an expedited rate. And then I'll echo once again Mayor Law and Councillor Thick's conversation about the use of those revenues, potential revenue stream that will come from this, and the benefits that might be moving forward as and those amenities that may be community focused. I'm open to those discussions. Of course, I would favor towards, as Councillor Thick pointed towards, some forms of recreational services, but we open to conversations about where the community might see the most benefit moving forward.
Councillor McMaster.
Yeah, echoing what Councillor Fick and Mayor Law said, I've been to a lot of communities around the world where on the parking signage it says parking funds are going to build this ice hockey arena or whatever. And I think it's really good to get the community on side if people know where these funds are going to. And I would like to see some community involvement as to decide where these funds go to, just like we have the people with the arts and culture grants determined. Maybe there's something where we just have a committee of the community decide where a portion of the parking funds go to.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I think that's an important discussion around where the funds are going. And also, I'd like to know, I think we still have a parking reserve fund. I don't know, or if we want to establish some sort of a reserve fund around some of the money that comes in, and maybe that could sort of define the spending parameters for parking monies. That might be one approach as well. Anyways, that discussion I think needs to be had. One of the sort of pitfalls, I guess, that we might be mindful of is large parking companies might be bidding on this or submitting proposals for this, and I'm not sure how well received that would be in Tofino. So I think it's important how we construct our request for proposals, and hopefully there will be some incentive for anyone submitting a proposal to hire local people, maybe get some of our social procurement goals in line with that request for proposals, and ultimately with the contract. I think that will also play into how well it is received. There are some giant parking companies out there that I think they would have trouble, first of all, establishing a workforce here to manage this. But how that is managed and what we ask for in terms of a third party to administrate the parking, I think is an important consideration as well. I think that what's been developed so far is very supportable. So many details and little nuances of particular user groups, little parking areas, what people are used to and where we're going. I don't think we're going to nail it absolutely 100% in the first go round. I think what's important is that we build in that sort of feedback loop so that we're checking in on the parking, what's working, what isn't. And I certainly before the main season and after the main season are important times to review what's working, what's not, what's changing. But probably almost quarterly for the first 3 to 5 years of this. I think it's good to have a good look at it and see what's working and what's not. So those are my thoughts right now.
We haven't quite gone around to everybody. I think Councillor Challenger, Councillor Chalmers, would you like to say anything before anybody says something twice?
I think I'd mostly be saying something twice. So I'm in support of moving forward at this point and getting into more of the detailed conversation as it's phased in.
I am the same as Councillor Challenger. I think all the comments were said throughout the presentation, and I'm supportive of the recommendations.
Great, and I do want to echo myself. I found Councillor Anderson's comments on third-party parking, the giant companies and issues with social procurement. I actually find that very fascinating and interesting, and I would like personally to see more exploration of that. I think that rings very true to me. With that in mind, If there's no more discussions.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Thick, go ahead.
Yeah.
You muted yourself.
Opposite mute.
The question of timeline. So in the report, I agree that we need to move forward, and I like the direction that we're going. But my question is timelines. Is it really realistic with where we are in the discussion to consider July 2021? I had some discussions with other people in the community, and they, you know, they're kind of thinking, wow, you know, first week of July could be the busiest week of 2021 so far. Maybe, is it realistic, is my question, to consider the timelines that are given in the report? And is it realistic to do that, to implement something that, you know, may be controversial at a time when it's really busy?
Through the mayor, I think the ambition and the timeline will really be sort of digested and kind of kick the corners out of that with the involvement of the RFP and the market. When the market responds, we did have some initial conversations with the RFI respondents, which I imagine will also be likely as proponents on the RFP. Whether or not they could turn around something like this that quickly with kiosks, a payment system, a digital application, introduction of a rate system and an enforcement schema and all these types of service lines. They provided us with a certain level of confidence that it was achievable within the summertime peak season. I also share the concerns that it could be, if we rush this, we could sacrifice change management and ease of use and community buy-in. And even if we are able to like get the services on the ground within that July timeframe, how we shift from no pay parking into pay parking and the hoods come off the kiosks and that kind of thing, the way that the user experiences that will be really important as far as the success of the initial phases and potentially the success of the whole program. I think besides what the contractor is able to provide and what we're able to support from a staff perspective, I think that there's still a chance that we could end up doing that before the summer's over. But I also wanted to mention that the administration of the annual passes and the program to do that is also going to take several weeks, where whether there's a forgiveness period at the introductory phases and then we come in with our administrative process, or if we phase in our administrative process before the parking starts, will all have to be considered, and we'll have to look to others to learn how to do that well. So that and the social procurement kind of conversation that came here, I think what's critical is that we get the RFP out the door as quick as possible to the right level of quality. And then we let the market respond, and then we refine our timeline, look at some bylaw changes. And I think that the bylaw changes in some cases is potentially accounting for a pay parking system to be inside of the bylaw, and also just making sure that some of the changes are reflected in the wording there. So yeah, I think as the staff person kind of on point on this one, what are my kind of like mitigation strategies to manage timeline? It's to lean as hard as I can on procurement specialists, RFP success, and also getting some horsepower to help me and the team at staff level execute on the daily kind of like checks and balances, crossing T's, dotting I's, and making sure that things happen, and supported on the inside to do the thousands of decisions that have to be made and to continue moving forward. I think that we'll be back to council with a check-in when we have the RFP responses, and that'll be also a check-in on timeline. So I think what we do is we sort of step to that next milestone and are able to actually define where we're going to land as far as implementation execution. And on that note, I'll look to my lower left tile, which is the CAO, to see if he wanted to potentially add some commentary on that piece.
No, I think we're going to find out pretty quick if the timeline is realistic, as Fraser has described.
And Mr. Work, I believe there was something you also asked of council is to get direction on the level of community engagement. And I don't know if we've addressed that or not here.
Thanks, Mayor Law. I think if I would just offer up one last comment about timelines of implementation. The series of parking configuration improvements and signage and delineation and wheel stops and herringbone configurations and all the stuff that I talked about before, we're going to proceed with that right away. There's no reason for us to wait for pay parking. We need that anyway. We need those improvements. We need those parking stalls painted on the ground. We need all that stuff to happen. So we're going to move forward with that based on our normal operations and using some third-party line painting services and that kind of thing. So we're going to move ahead. And then jumping to Mayor Law's comment about about communications and engagement levels. I guess I am a little bit sensitive to the expectations and the appetite for some people to like get right into every parking issue and to like work on this stuff, and I'll never get out of there alive. So while I want to do my due diligence and I want to make sure that I work with staff to have connected and had meaningful dialogue and stuff like that, there's going to be some people that are going to want to engage because I'm going to say, I'm taking your parking spot away out in front of the school or whatever. And they're going to feel that I didn't engage enough. And so, and in some respects, I want to give council assurance that we're going to do our due diligence and we're going to connect with people. And in other respects, I'm also kind of raising a little bit of a yellow flag saying that in some cases, no amount of engagement might be enough for certain users, or I might miss it in the intent, with the intention to get that higher priority thing done or that issue resolved. So I don't know if I can actually professionally ask for council to comment on where the line is, because I don't think that's a fair question. Maybe it's better just phrased as like, I'm going to do my professional best to manage that, and I'm going to draw the experts to me, and I'm going to work with staff, and we're going to do our best. And I think it's, the plan that we have devised, which was before council as part of the report, does include that kind of meaningful checks with the different groups within community and also the community at large. So yeah, but I do know that in the parking game, there's sometimes I would never be able to engage enough.
Great. Any other questions for Mr. Work? Okay, so we have a recommendation. We actually have 13 recommendations on the page here. Now, I noticed I was going down there, and there was one, of course, the two councillors mentioned the social procurement, but I think you've answered that's RFP is going to go out, and then we'll talk about that as it comes back. And then number 10, report on policy recommendations for allocating parking revenues to support district mobility infrastructure. I think a majority of councillors expressed interest in using those funds for something other, or in that, of course, mobility infrastructure, but also other avenues such as recreation, I believe. So we're going to have to, if we're going to pass this motion, then I would like some wording change there so that that's very clear. We could probably just strike out, we could say report on policy and recommendations for allocating parking revenues as per future discussions as part of the 2022 financial planning process, etc. And perhaps Ms. Gocher-Bergman can give us some advice on this one.
Through the mayor, yes, that is an appropriate amendment. I would ask that the entirety of the motion be read out when you're ready to do so, just for clarity to staff and those who have stuck with us to the end of this meeting.
Sure, I was actually, before we started reading out, I wanted to make sure the language was there, because it's going to be some fast reading.
Absolutely. So currently what I have as an amended proposal would be in number 10, report on policy recommendations for allocating parking revenues as part of the 2022 financial planning process. And I'm just going to remove the duplication as part of the 2022 financial planning process. So sorry, number 10 is report on policy and recommendations for allocating parking revenues as part of the 2022 financial planning process.
Great, and I'm looking for council's nodding. So yes, okay, mostly nodding. Okay, well, then I think we have 13 recommendations here that we can read out. Who is brave?
I'll do it. Oh, no, Councillor Challenger, if you want to do it, go for it.
I'll do it. I haven't moved a recommendation in.
Jackie, you got it.
Silence
We'll do this
so
one.
far. I'll go in big. All right, so I'll move the recommendation that staff be authorized to continue plans and preparation to introduce beach pay parking as outlined in the report dated April 26, 2021, informed by direction received from council. 2, release and report back on the results from the parking services RFP. 3, engage and consult with community stakeholders as outlined in the April 26, 2021 report. 4, prepare amendments to parking and traffic bylaw number 1091 for council's consideration in advance of implementation. 5, develop and report back on plans to incentives to reduce private vehicle storage in the public right of way. 6, develop a temporary street occupancy permit system and report back on implications and required bylaw changes. 7, propose a set of sustainable mobility and GHG reduction incentives as part of the 2022 parking system improvements. 8, report annually on parking system performance changes and management information as part of the financial planning process. 9, report on the plans for downtown pay parking and beach parking improvements as part of the 2022 financial planning process. 10, report on policy and recommendations for allocating parking revenues to as part of the 2022 financial planning process. Was that correct for 10? Okay. 11, continue partnering with MOTI on safety improvements and parking management at and along Highway 4 in areas of primary importance and safety concern. 12, commence design work for Lynn and Chesterman Beach roads that improve road design for all users, including improved parking amenities. And 13, develop plans and a system to track and report traffic and parking operational data to inform future decisions and planning.
Nailed it. And seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thanks, great. And if there's no objection to adjourning.
Through the mayor, this
Yes.
is Elise speaking. I did want to note that we had one person sign up for a question answer period, which does not appear on the agenda. And that is my fault. As a special agenda, we don't always include every item in the agenda, and there should be a public comment as well as a question answer period. So I'd like to put it to council. Would you permit a 2-minute statement from a member of the public where in place of a public comment, question answer period at the end of the agenda, starting now.
Is there any objection? No, seeing no objection, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Law. So Diane Warren, I'm going to unmute you and allow you to speak for 2 minutes to the item of, I believe it was the parking item that you wanted to speak to. So Diane, you are able to unmute yourself and you can begin to speak whenever you'd like to. I hope that Diane has stuck with us to the end of the meeting. Maybe we'll give her a few more seconds to unmute herself.
Oh, here we go, sorry. A lot of my questions did get answered, so that's great. But I was just concerned about locals parking on Lynn Road. So if somebody lives on Lynn Road and they are going to park on the street and they live there, are they going to be able to park for more than 4 hours? And also, if somebody, I know you mentioned companies like Surf Sister and surf schools, but what if somebody else is, you know, say a surf photographer and they need to go down and do a shoot down on a beach or something like that? Will they get a special license for doing that as well? So that was mainly my 2 questions regarding parking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane, for sticking through the meeting with us. Over to you, Mr. Work.
Thanks, Mayor Law, and thanks for the question. Under the current rules, the best case scenario based on the current configuration or the recommended configuration was that people living on Lynn Road would park their private vehicles on private property, and Lynn Road would be used mainly for visitors of Lynn Road. The recommended set of proposals would shift that user or tenant of a Lynn Road accommodations to the private property side. The second question, which was if there was a surf photographer to take pictures and access the beach as a common occurrence, would they require a separate license or a permit to park there? That is potentially one of those cases that we would have wrapped up in one of the recommendations, which said a certain commercial license or permit for users, frequent users of the beach as part of their business model. So I think we have a very, very common occurrence of surf schools and instructors that use the beach and the parking in front of the beach access points that we would want to treat in the initial phases through a special permitting and a rate. And in this case, what would happen for a photographer that might not necessarily be covered by a program until it matures in future years, would that they would buy that sort of standard commercial license to park on the beach with an upper limit of 4 hours. So I hope that answers the question. Probably an unfavorable answer as far as the first one goes for some tenants that on Lynn Road that often do park on the road, but the intent is to shift those private vehicle storage instances to the properties on Lynn Road, the private properties.
Thank you, Mr. Work. Okay, and there will be a public consultation with this parking as well. So just to encourage people listening or viewing later that there'll be options for input into this scheme. Yes, Councillor Anderson.
I just wanted to add to the person that asked a question, Diane Warren. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the district also has requirements for vacationing short-term rental properties to provide parking for their guests, and that's part of the business licensing process.
Any other comments before we move to adjourn? Would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn? Motion by Councillor Chalmers, seconded by Mr. Councillor McMaster. All in favor? Motion is carried.